Hey there, tonight we're exploring the brutal laws of the Qin Dynasty's China, where the truth is that even minor infractions could lead to life-altering punishments, reshaping society with fear and order beneath the terracotta soldier's watchful gaze. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now make yourself cozy, maybe adjust your room temperature or get that cup of tea, and let's explore tonight's tale together. You find yourself in a world where your every move is scrutinized by laws as tight as a drum. Welcome to 221 BCE in the Qin Dynasty, where Qin Shi Huang, the man who made paranoid a lifestyle, is calling the shots. This is China's first emperor, and boy, does he have plans. Picture a guy with a vision so grand, it makes those modern tech moguls look like they're just playing with Lego bricks. His mission? To unify the Middle Kingdom, because why have a bunch of squabbling states when you can have one big happy authoritarian family? But let's talk about the real star of the show, legalism. Forget Confucius with his feel-good, be a good person vibes. Legalism is here to tell you that it doesn't matter if you're nice. If you're not following the rules, you're toast. This philosophy is the brainchild of Han Fei, a guy with a knack for turning society into an elaborate game of Simon Says, with consequences you really don't want to face. The idea is simple. People are inherently selfish and short-sighted, so the only way to keep them in line is through strict laws and harsh penalties. It's like your high school detention, but with a side of existential dread. Now let's get into the nitty-gritty of these laws. You might think, how bad could it be? Well, imagine getting penalized for not reporting a crime. Yes, the Qin Dynasty thought snitching was a civic duty. Didn't report that your buddy stole a chicken. That's on you, pal. Or how about this? If your neighbor breaks the law and you didn't turn them in, you could be in just as much trouble as they are. It's a social network built on paranoia where everyone is your big brother. And what about those laws? Oh, they were detailed. We're talking about a legal code that was as intricate as a Swiss watch. For instance, there were rules about how many family members could live together and the exact price of grain. The Qin Dynasty's legal system was a bureaucrat's dream and a commoner's nightmare, with punishments that could make a medieval dungeon look like a luxury day spa. Cross the line, and you could face mutilation or death. Caught with an unauthorized opinion, good luck explaining that one to the authorities. The political landscape was a chessboard where ministers had to navigate these brutal laws to stay in the game. It was less about governance and more about survival. You had Li Si, the prime minister, who was a master at this deadly game of thrones. He championed legalism not just because he believed in it, but because it was his ticket to staying alive and in power. But even he couldn't escape the paranoia entirely. As the story goes, he eventually fell out of favor and met a grim fate, executed along with his family. In the Qin Dynasty, you were always one step away from being checkmated. So why did all this matter? For one, it set the stage for a centralized state, unlike anything China had seen before. By unifying the legal system, Qin Shi Huang was able to consolidate power and keep a tight grip on his empire. This wasn't just about keeping order, though. It was about stamping out any hint of dissent, ensuring that no one could challenge his authority. The harsh reality was that this system, while brutally efficient, laid the groundwork for a unified China that could withstand the test of time. But let's not romanticize it too much. Behind every great dynasty is a trail of broken lives and crushed spirits. The Qin Dynasty's legacy is a paradox. On one hand, it's the foundation of modern China. On the other, it's a testament to the extremes of human governance. So, as you navigate this world of strict laws and ceaseless scrutiny, remember that every detail, every regulation, was designed to keep the emperor's dream alive. The Qin Dynasty was a time when sneezing in the wrong direction could be a life-or-death matter, and where even the smallest misstep could mean the end of the road. And that, my friend, is the brutal truth behind the grandeur of Qin Shi Huang's reign. So, as you navigate this world of strict laws and ceaseless scrutiny, remember that every detail, every regulation, was designed to keep the emperor's dream alive. But a dream this big needed more than just rules. It needed an economic engine to run it. And boy, did Qin Shi Huang have a master plan for that. Welcome to the Qin Dynasty, where standardization wasn't just the word of the day. It was the empire's mantra. Think of it as the ancient equivalent of a corporate rebranding, but instead of new logos, you got a whole new way of living. The emperor figured out that if you want a smooth-running empire, you need everyone on the same page, or scroll, as it were. Let's start with currency. Before the Qin, China was a bit like your favorite aunt's purse, filled with random coins of all shapes and sizes. Qin Shi Huang rolled out a uniform currency, a round coin with a square hole in the middle. It was a symbol of heaven and earth, but more importantly, it was a tool to streamline trade. Suddenly, you didn't need to carry around a calculator to do business across different states. Trade became as easy as pie, albeit a pie that could cost you your livelihood if you miscounted your change. But why stop at currency when you can standardize everything? Weights and measures were next on the list. Imagine trying to trade when a pound in one state was a pound and a half in another. The Qin Dynasty put an end to that confusion faster than you can say legalism. By unifying weights and measures, Qin Shi Huang effectively created a seamless market. This was the original one-size-fits-all solution, and it worked. Trade flowed like wine at a Roman banquet, and taxes became easier to collect. Yes, taxes, because when you standardize everything, you can also standardize how much everyone owes you. And then there were axle lengths. Yes, axle lengths. Why, you ask? Well, it's not just an old man's obsession with detail. By standardizing the width of axles, all carts could travel on the same ruts in roads across the empire. This wasn't just a boon for cartographers, it was a logistical masterpiece. Imagine the efficiency. Goods could move faster, armies could mobilize quicker, and the emperor could keep tabs on his vast empire with the flick of a rein. Sounds like a utopia of order, right? Well, not if you were a peasant. While the merchants and tax collectors were doing a happy dance, the common folk were caught in what felt like a historical rat race. The Qin dynasty's changes might have streamlined trade and made tax collection a breeze, but they also turned the daily grind into a high-stakes game of survival. Peasants had to adjust to a new economic order that prioritized the state's coffers over their own survival. It was like being forced to run a marathon when all you wanted was a leisurely stroll. But money and measures were just the start. The Qin dynasty also had grandiose projects that needed manpower, lots of it. Enter the Great Wall of China. Not the one you see today, but a series of walls and fortifications that would be the envy of any medieval king. Qin Shi Huang wasn't just building a wall, he was building a legacy, one brick at a time. The reality, though, was less inspiring. It was a massive drain on resources, and more tragically, on human life. Tens of thousands of laborers, many of whom were conscripted peasants, toiled and perished under brutal conditions. The wall may have been a symbol of strength, but for the workers, it was a monument to suffering. And let's not forget the emperor's other pet project, his mausoleum. Designed to be an underground city guarded by the now famous terracotta army, it was the kind of grandiosity that would make a pharaoh blush. This project siphoned off labor and resources that could have been used to improve the lives of the living. But hey, what's a little extravagance when you're planning to rule in the afterlife, right? In the Qin dynasty, the economy was both a marvel and a monster. It was a system that could unify a nation and crush a spirit with equal ease. The standardized economy brought about efficiencies that were unheard of, but it also came at a cost that was all too human. The reality of Qin Shi Huang's reign was a harsh one. For every grand achievement, there was a shadow of human toil and sacrifice. As we continue to peel back the layers of this ancient empire, remember that behind every standardized coin, every uniform cart axle, there were people whose lives were forever altered. Some thrived in this new world, while others were left to pick up the pieces. The Qin Dynasty was a time of monumental change, where the promise of progress was as tantalizing as it was terrifying. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this epic tale of ambition, power, and the relentless march of history. Speaking of the relentless march of history, let's take a detour into the mind of Qin Shi Huang, the emperor who was convinced that knowledge was best served cold, or rather, not served at all if it posed a threat to his iron grip. You see, Qin Shi Huang was the kind of ruler who saw dissent lurking in the shadows of every scroll and behind the beard of every scholar. To him, books were not just dusty tomes. They were potential weapons of mass disruption. Our story takes a dark turn in 213 BCE, when the emperor decided that the best way to unify thought was to literally burn the competition. We're talking about the infamous burning of books and burying of scholars campaign. I know it sounds like a bad sequel to a dystopian novel, but it actually happened. The emperor ordered that all historical records, except those related to Qin, be consigned to the flames. Confucian classics, poetry, philosophy, anything that didn't sing the praises of the current regime was toast. The official reason. To prevent comparisons between the Qin dynasty and its less draconian predecessors. The real reason. Good old-fashioned paranoia. Now, you might be wondering how many books we're talking about here. While exact numbers are about as elusive as a unicorn, estimates suggest thousands of texts went up in smoke. Imagine centuries of wisdom and culture turning to ash, all because one man couldn't handle a little criticism. It's like deleting your entire hard drive because one file had a virus. Sure, it solves the immediate problem, but at what cost? But wait, there's more. Qin Shi Huang didn't stop at book burning. If you thought his love for dramatic gestures ended there, think again. The emperor also took issue with the scholars themselves. After all, what's the point of burning books if the people who can rewrite them are still around? Enter the mass burial of scholars. Legend has it that 460 scholars who dared to criticize the emperor's policies were buried alive. Yes, alive. Talk about taking the phrase, burying the hatchet, to a whole new level. The social implications of these actions were profound and deeply chilling. By eradicating dissenting voices and controlling the narrative, Qin Shi Huang aimed to create a society where only one version of the truth prevailed, his. It was a move that not only stifled intellectual discourse, but also instilled a climate of fear that rippled through Chinese society like a stone dropped into a still pond. In the short term, this might have seemed like a stroke of genius. No books, no opposition, right. But in the long run, it was a cultural catastrophe. Imagine the Renaissance without the manuscripts of the ancient Greeks, or the Enlightenment without the philosophical musings of the past. The loss of countless scrolls meant that future generations were deprived of a wealth of knowledge and cultural heritage. It's like erasing your family photos because you don't like your haircut in one of them. Sure, you might look better in the next one, but you'll never get the memories back. And let's talk about the scholars who managed to survive this reign of terror. Many went into hiding, taking their knowledge underground, quite literally. They became like intellectual moles, burrowing away from the prying eyes of the state. The very fabric of academic and philosophical life was torn apart, leaving a vacuum that took centuries to refill. This wasn't just about books and scholars. It was about the very soul of a civilization. The Qin dynasty, for all its achievements in unification and standardization, was a cultural black hole. The emperor's actions left a legacy of fear and censorship that would echo throughout Chinese history. It was a stark reminder that while emperors may rule with an iron fist, they cannot silence the human spirit forever. Ironically, Qin Shi Huang's attempts to control every aspect of life, down to the thoughts in people's heads, highlighted the limits of his power. Despite his best efforts to create a monolithic state, people continued to think, question, and resist. The more he tried to stamp out dissent, the more it simmered beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to boil over. In the end, the emperor's paranoia was both his greatest strength and his fatal flaw. It enabled him to tighten his grip on power, but it also sowed the seeds of his dynasty's downfall. The Qin dynasty, like a house of cards, was built on a foundation of fear and control. And as history has shown us time and time again, such structures are inherently unstable. As we continue our journey through the annals of this remarkable period, remember that behind every act of tyranny is a story of resistance. For every book burned and scholar buried, there were countless others who kept the flame of knowledge alive, waiting for the day when it could shine once more. Stay tuned for more tales of ambition, power, and the indomitable human spirit as we peel back the layers of this ancient empire. And speaking of stories of resistance, let's dive into the world where laws were as unforgiving as a hangover after a night of cheap wine. Welcome to the Qin Dynasty's legal system, a place where making a mistake didn't just ruin your day. It could ruin your entire family's decade. This was a time when collective responsibility wasn't just a corporate buzzword, it was the law. And boy, was it a doozy. Imagine living in a world where if your brother decided to pilfer a few grains of rice, you and your entire family could end up in shackles. That's right, in the Qin dynasty, if one person in your family committed a crime, everyone could be punished. Talk about a family bonding experience, right? It's like the Brady Bunch, but with more chains and fewer catchy theme songs. This principle of collective responsibility was supposed to maintain order, but it often led to chaos. You'd think it would create a society of law-abiding citizens, but it mostly created a society of paranoid, finger-pointing neighbors. People started turning each other in faster than you could say legalism, because who wants to end up in the slammer for something they didn't do? And then there were the punishments themselves, which were so creative they could have inspired a medieval horror novel. You might think that a slap on the wrist would suffice for petty crimes, but think again. The Qin legal system had a penchant for corporal punishment that would make a Roman gladiator cringe. We're talking about tattooing faces, chopping off noses, and even death by slow slicing, also known as lynchai, a method that sounds like it was dreamt up by a particularly sadistic butcher. Now, you might be wondering why anyone would dream up such draconian laws. The idea was to act as a deterrent, but in reality, it just fostered widespread resentment. People weren't so much deterred from crime as they were terrified of each other. It's like trying to prevent cheating on a test by threatening to burn down the school if anyone gets caught. Sure, it might prevent cheating, but it'll also leave you with a lot of scorched earth and angry students. Let's not forget the iron grip of surveillance that came along with these laws. The Qin dynasty's legal system was obsessed with control, and nothing was off-limits. The government employed an army of officials who were basically the ancient equivalent of CCTV cameras, watching your every move. These guys were everywhere, making sure you didn't step out of line, literally or figuratively. It was like living in a dystopian novel where Big Brother was very real and very much in your face. But here's the kicker. Despite, or perhaps because of, these brutal laws, the Qin dynasty didn't last long. Qin Shi Huang's empire crumbled just a few years after his death, in 206 BCE. Turns out, ruling through fear and paranoia isn't exactly a recipe for lasting peace. Who knew? It's like trying to keep a pot from boiling over by putting a lid on it and cranking up the heat. Eventually, something's gotta give. The legal system's attempt to control the populace through fear and punishment ultimately backfired. The very laws that were supposed to keep the empire together ended up tearing it apart. People were so fed up with the constant surveillance and arbitrary punishments that they were willing to risk it all in revolt. The harsh penalties and collective punishments didn't just create a society of law-abiding citizens. They created a society of rebels waiting for their moment to strike. In the end, the Qin dynasty serves as a cautionary tale about the limits of control. Sure, you can enforce compliance with an iron fist, but at what cost? The people of Qin lived in a world where even the smallest mistake could lead to disaster, and that kind of pressure doesn't make for a happy, prosperous society. It makes for a powder keg waiting to explode. As we wrap up this part of our journey through the Qin dynasty, remember that behind every draconian law and harsh punishment was a human story. People who were just trying to get by, caught in a system that viewed them as little more than cogs in a machine. The Qin Dynasty's legal system may have been designed to maintain order, but it also highlighted the inherent chaos of trying to control human nature through fear. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the threads of this complex tapestry, exploring the final pages of this remarkable, and at times, brutal chapter in history. We've seen how laws can be both a tool of control and a source of rebellion, and there's still more to uncover. So, buckle up, because the ride isn't over yet. As we wrap up this part of our journey through the Qin dynasty, remember that behind every draconian law and harsh punishment was a human story. People who were just trying to get by, caught in a system that viewed them as little more than cogs in a machine. The Qin dynasty's legal system may have been designed to maintain order, but it also highlighted the inherent chaos of trying to control human nature through fear. And so, the tale of the Qin dynasty winds down, its legacy a mix of groundbreaking governance and suffocating oppression. You see, Qin Shi Huang's reign was like a firework, a spectacular burst of light, breathtaking for a moment, but inevitably burning out in a blaze of its own intensity. 15 years. That's all the Qin dynasty had. Blink, and you'd miss it. But what a 15 years they were. The imprint left by their brief rule echoed through the corridors of Chinese history like the last notes of a symphony played by an orchestra of steel. Now let's address the elephant in the room, the transition to the Han dynasty. If you thought the Qin's legalistic roller coaster was a one-off, think again. When the dust settled after the Qin's collapse, the Han dynasty rose from the ashes, much like a mythical phoenix. Only this phoenix had a few tricks up its sleeve. The Han looked at the Qin's playbook, took a deep breath and said, "We can work with this, but maybe let's tone down the whole burying scholars alive bit." Smart move, Han. Smart move. The Han dynasty, which lasted over 4 centuries, took the Qin's centralized government structure and ran with it, albeit with a bit more humanity. They retained the centralized bureaucracy, but added a sprinkle of Confucianism to soften the edges. Imagine the Qin's harsh legalism getting a makeover with a touch of Confucian kindness. It was like turning a prison into a day spa. Well, almost. The Han understood that while laws were necessary for order, a little compassion went a long way in keeping people happy and productive. They created a balance that allowed them to maintain control without the constant fear of rebellion. It was the political equivalent of learning to dance in the rain instead of cursing the storm. But let's not get too romantic here. The Han weren't saints by any stretch. They kept a tight grip on power, but they knew when to let the leash out a bit. They saw the value in promoting education, an idea the Qin had quite literally buried. By establishing Confucian academies and making scholarly knowledge a path to government positions, they ensured that the brightest minds weren't just surviving but thriving. The Han took the Qin's concept of a unified China and gave it staying power, creating a cultural and political foundation that would last for centuries. Economically, the Han picked up where the Qin left off, but with a bit more finesse. They continued the standardization of currency and measurements, which kept trade humming along like a well-oiled machine. The Han expanded the Silk Road, turning China into an ancient economic powerhouse. Picture bustling marketplaces filled with everything from silk and spices to those square-holed coins that were the Qin's claim to fame. Trade wasn't just a local affair anymore. It was a sprawling, cross-continental network that connected China to the rest of the world. And what about those grand construction projects? The Han continued to build and fortify, including expanding the Great Wall. But they weren't just about bricks and mortar. The Han invested in infrastructure that improved the lives of the average citizen, irrigation systems, roads and canals that boosted agriculture and trade. They understood that a happy populace, with full bellies and open trade routes, was less likely to revolt. The Han took the Qin's vision of a centralized state and made it work for the people, not just the rulers. So, what's the takeaway from this whirlwind of historical drama? The Qin dynasty, for all its harshness, laid the groundwork for a unified China. Their legalistic approach might have been extreme, but it showed the potential for centralized power to bring about monumental change. The Han took that potential and refined it, creating a legacy that would influence Chinese governance for millennia. They proved that even the harshest regimes have their silver linings, and that change, no matter how brutal, can pave the way for progress. The Qin Dynasty's legacy is a testament to the complex dance between control and freedom, order and chaos. It reminds us that while you can enforce compliance with an iron fist, true stability comes from understanding and adapting to the needs of the people. The Qin may have ruled through fear, but they inadvertently set the stage for a more balanced governance that would endure long after their short-lived empire crumbled into dust. In the end, the Qin dynasty's story is one of ambition and overreach, of brilliance and brutality, of a dream that burned too bright to last. But it's also a story of resilience, of how even the harshest regimes can't silence change forever. The Qin showed us the power of centralized authority, and the Han taught us how to wield it wisely. It's a lesson that echoes through history, reminding us that the greatest empires are built not just on power, but on the enduring strength of human ingenuity and adaptability. So, as we close the book on the Qin dynasty, let's tip our hats to the past and carry its lessons forward. After all, history may be a series of stories written in the dust of ages, but its echoes shape the world we live in today. And that's a legacy worth remembering. In the chaotic world of late 19th century Germany, where the air was thick with both industrial smoke and intellectual fervor, a peculiar little boy named Albert Einstein was busy defying every expectation. Born in 1879 in the city of Ulm, Einstein didn't exactly burst onto the scene with the fireworks of genius. In fact, he was more of a slow burn. Those first few years, not what you'd call promising. The lad didn't speak until he was 4, and when he finally did, his words tumbled out in a curious, mumbly sort of way that had his parents wondering if the stork had dropped him on the head on delivery. But let's set the record straight. This wasn't an omen of future brilliance cloaked in mystery. It was just a kid taking his sweet time. Speaking of myths, let's tackle the tall tale that Einstein was a dunce in school. Yes, he was labeled a lazy dog by his teachers, but this wasn't because he was flunking arithmetic. No, it was because he refused to play their rigid educational game. In a system that valued rote memorization over critical thinking, young Albert often found himself at odds with his instructors. He challenged assumptions and questioned authority, which, as you can imagine, didn't win him any teacher's pet awards. Now let's dig into those quirky family dynamics. The Einstein household was anything but ordinary. His father, Hermann, was an electrical engineer and a bit of a dreamer himself, while his mother, Pauline, was a pianist with an ear for perfect pitch and a penchant for perfectionism that would make a drill sergeant blush. The family moved to Munich when Albert was just a year old, where his father and uncle ran an electrical company. Imagine little Albert running around a house that buzzed with discussions of electromagnetism and sonatas, his mind sparking with ideas like wires in a circuit. But it wasn't all symphonies and science experiments. The Einstein family had its fair share of drama. Their business hit rocky waters, leading to financial struggles that forced them to move once again, this time to Italy when Albert was 15. Not one to let geography dictate his education, he stayed behind to finish school. Well, sort of. He dropped out soon after, citing a clash with the regimented Prussian educational system. But don't mistake this for academic failure. The kid was teaching himself calculus by the age of 12. That's right. While most of us were still trying to figure out the mystery of long division, Einstein was grappling with the intricacies of calculus. Here's a delightful nugget. Einstein wasn't a fan of socks. He famously ditched them whenever possible, believing they were a useless invention prone to holes. This might seem trivial, but it paints a picture of a man who questioned the status quo in every aspect of life. The same curiosity and disdain for unnecessary conventions that had him going sockless also fueled his scientific inquiries. And let's not forget the violin. Einstein didn't just play it. He was rather passionate about it. Music wasn't just a pastime, it was a lifeline. He once said, "Life without playing music is inconceivable for me. I live my daydreams in music. I see my life in terms of music." This wasn't some idle hobby. His violin was a constant companion, especially during those solitary moments of contemplation that would eventually lead to his groundbreaking theories. Einstein's early years might have been marked by a lack of traditional academic accolades, but they were rich with learning and exploration. From questioning the mechanics of the compass, an event he later cited as one of his earliest memories of wonder, to the influence of his uncle Jakob, who introduced him to the joys of algebra, young Albert was a sponge soaking up the world around him. The tales of his early misdirection are often romanticized, painting him as a misunderstood genius waiting to burst forth. While there's a kernel of truth to this, it overlooks the hard work and determination that characterized his life. He wasn't just a prodigy waiting for the right moment. He was a relentless thinker, a questioner of norms, and a challenger of convention. So, as we close this chapter on Einstein's formative years, remember this. The boy who was once thought to be slow, who was labeled a lazy dog, and who found himself at odds with traditional education, was never confined by these labels. He was too busy dreaming of ways to understand the universe, one thought experiment at a time. The world might have been skeptical, but Einstein had already set his eyes on the stars, and he wasn't about to let a few naysayers spoil the view. Einstein's journey from the boy who was once thought to be slow to a student at the Swiss Federal Polytechnic in Zurich is a tale of tenacity and, frankly, a touch of teenage rebellion. Picture it. A 16-year-old Einstein, armed with a letter from a family friend, somehow charmed his way into the entrance exam for this prestigious institution, despite not having the required high school diploma. But hold your applause. It wasn't all smooth sailing. He failed the exam the first time. Yes, even geniuses have their off days. But in classic Einstein fashion, he aced the math and physics sections, flunking French, chemistry, and biology. Guess conjugating verbs and memorizing the periodic table wasn't his jam. So he took a detour, spending a year at a Swiss school to brush up on those pesky subjects before finally securing a spot at the Polytechnic in 1896. Now, you might think that once he got into the Polytechnic, Einstein would have soared to the top of the class, right? Wrong. The place was crawling with brilliant minds, and Einstein, bless his nonconformist heart, was exactly the model student. He skipped lectures with the enthusiasm of a cat avoiding a bath, preferring to study what intrigued him rather than what was on the syllabus. His professors weren't impressed. In fact, his future PhD advisor, Heinrich Weber, was so bewildered by Einstein's lack of attendance that he famously quipped, "You're a smart boy, Einstein, a very smart boy. But you have one great fault. You'll never let yourself be told anything." Talk about a backhanded compliment, and let's not forget the economic context of the time. The turn of the 20th century was a period of rapid industrialization, with new technologies and scientific discoveries reshaping society. The Polytechnic, nestled in the bustling city of Zurich, was at the heart of this intellectual and technological revolution. Yet, despite the buzz, Einstein found himself more interested in the abstract world of theoretical physics than in the practical applications that promised fat paychecks. He and his fellow students, including a certain Malva Marek, who'd later become his first wife, would gather in cafes to grapple with the latest scientific theories, sipping coffee as they pondered the cosmos. Graduation came in 1900, and with it, a harsh dose of reality. Unlike his classmates who secured cushy teaching positions, Einstein found himself unemployed in a job market as welcoming as a Swiss winter. He applied for academic positions across Europe, only to be met with a chorus of rejections. So much for the allure of a diploma from a top-tier institution. It turns out, being a maverick in the classroom didn't exactly translate to a stellar resume. He survived by giving private lessons, a gig that paid about 8 Swiss francs per hour, barely enough to keep him in coffee and notebooks. In a twist of fate that would make even the stingiest of Greek gods chuckle, Einstein landed a job in 1902 at the Swiss Patent Office in Bern. The position, technical expert third class. The pay, a modest 3,500 Swiss francs per year, but the job came with a hidden perk, mental breathing room. His task was to evaluate patent applications for electromagnetic devices. Sounds riveting, right? Well, for Einstein, it was perfect. The job was low pressure and allowed him to daydream about the mysteries of the universe during office hours. Plus, the steady paycheck meant he could support Malva and their burgeoning little family. Yes, Einstein was juggling new parenthood with his professional and scientific ambitions. And here's a delicious irony. While the world of academia turned a cold shoulder, the sleepy patent office became a crucible for Einstein's revolutionary ideas. It was here, amid stacks of papers and the humdrum of bureaucratic life, that he began developing his theory of special relativity. He even famously called the office his worldly cloister, a sanctuary where his thoughts could roam free. In 1905, often dubbed the Miracle Year or Annus Mirabilis, Einstein published 4 groundbreaking papers, including one on the photoelectric effect, which would later win him a Nobel Prize. But don't let the romance of the story fool you. This wasn't some magical transformation overnight. It was the result of years of obsessive thought and relentless questioning. So what's the takeaway here? Einstein's path was anything but linear. His early academic life was marked by unconventional choices and a stubborn refusal to follow the herd. He navigated a world that often seemed indifferent, if not outright hostile, to his talents. And yet, it was in the spaces between conventional success that he found his true calling. The very flaws that made him a misfit in traditional settings became his greatest strengths at the patent office. In a world that valued conformity, Einstein dared to dream differently, and it was precisely this audacity that set him on the path to becoming a scientific legend. But let's not wrap this up just yet. Einstein's journey is far from over. The years at the patent office were merely the beginning of a career that would see him challenge the very foundations of physics. So stay tuned, because in the next chapter, we'll dive into how Einstein's theories not only revolutionized science, but also challenged the world's understanding of reality itself. Get ready for a wild ride through the mind of a man who redefined the cosmos, one equation at a time. And so, as Einstein settled into his routine at the patent office, the universe had no idea it was about to get a makeover. Enter 1905, a year that Napoleon would have envied for its sheer impact. This was Einstein's Annus Mirabilis, Latin for miracle year, though in reality it was more a testament to hard graft and a mind that refused to stay in its lane. While the rest of us might have been content with a steady job and the occasional weekend getaway, Einstein was out, here rewriting the rules of physics on his lunch break. First up, Einstein tackled the photoelectric effect. Now, before you zone out, let me break it down. This was where he suggested that light, that thing we casually flip on with a switch, is made up of particles called photons. Imagine telling a room full of physicists that light isn't just a wave, and watching their monocles pop out. This paper would eventually earn him the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1921, although it's often overshadowed by his more famous work on relativity. But hey, who doesn't love a good underdog story? Speaking of relativity, that brings us to the second paper of 1905, which introduced the special theory of relativity. Here's the deal. Before Einstein, people thought that time and space were as fixed as your grandma's opinion on tattoos. But Einstein, he waltzed in and said, not so fast. He proposed that time and space are intertwined in a 4-dimensional fabric called spacetime. The faster you move through space, the slower you move through time. It's the kind of revelation that makes you question your reality and maybe your choice of breakfast cereal. The third paper. Einstein tackled Brownian motion, which had been a mystery since it was first observed by botanist Robert Brown in 1827. Einstein's explanation proved the existence of atoms, providing the first mathematical evidence that these tiny particles were more than just a figment of the scientific imagination. Imagine finally being able to show that the universe is made of little Lego blocks, only invisible and way more complicated. Finally, in what can only be described as a mic drop moment, Einstein published his fourth paper, which introduced the equation E equals mc2. This little formula suggested that mass and energy are interchangeable. Mind blown, right? It's the kind of thing that seems obvious in hindsight, like wondering why we ever thought shoulder pads were a good idea. But back then, it was revolutionary. This equation would later underpin everything from nuclear power to the workings of the universe. What's truly remarkable is how Einstein's ideas turned the academic world on its head. It wasn't just the content of his papers that shook the foundations of physics, it was the audacity of it all. Here was a guy, working a 9-to-5 job, who managed to redefine the laws of nature in his spare time. While the rest of us are trying to figure out what to stream next, Einstein was reimagining the cosmos. Einstein's approach to science was as light-hearted as it was revolutionary. He had a knack for thought experiments. Imagine riding alongside a beam of light or falling freely in an elevator. These playful mental exercises allowed him to explore concepts that were otherwise impossible to test at the time. He once quipped, "If at first the idea is not absurd, then there is no hope for it." It's a sentiment that captures his willingness to embrace the unconventional, to follow the idea that everyone else dismissed as too out there. But why did these ideas matter? Well, they laid the groundwork for the modern world. His theories on relativity eventually led to GPS systems, which rely on understanding the distortions of time and space. Without Einstein's insights, your smartphone would be as lost as you are without a map. Yet, let's not get too misty-eyed about it. Einstein's journey was anything but a fairy tale. The academic community wasn't exactly rolling out the red carpet. Many of his peers were skeptical, some dismissive, and others downright hostile. It's like showing up to a formal dinner in a Hawaiian shirt. No matter how right you are, some people just can't handle change. But Einstein had a secret weapon, his ability to communicate complex ideas in simple terms. He had a gift for making the incomprehensible accessible, a talent that would endear him to both the public and his fellow scientists. In a world that often equates intelligence with jargon, Einstein's clarity was as refreshing as a breeze on a hot day. The economic context of the time also played a role in the reception of his ideas. The early 20th century was a period of rapid technological advancement, with industries hungry for innovation. Einstein's theories offered new ways of understanding energy and matter, concepts that would fuel further technological breakthroughs. His ideas were like high-octane fuel for a world speeding into the future. And let's talk about his light-hearted side. Einstein had a sense of humor that was as sharp as his intellect. He once said, "A question that sometimes drives me hazy. Am I or are the others crazy?" It's a line that encapsulates his ability to remain amused and grounded despite the whirlwind of attention and controversy surrounding his work. Yet, despite his rising fame, Einstein remained refreshingly human. He was known to play his beloved violin to unwind, a reminder that even the greatest minds need a moment of respite. It was as if he understood that while equations could explain the universe, music was needed to truly feel it. In this whirlwind of a year, Einstein's ability to balance his professional responsibilities with his passion for theoretical physics is nothing short of remarkable. He was a man who lived by his convictions, unafraid to challenge the status quo, and confident enough to trust his instincts. Einstein's 1905 was a year of miracles, but perhaps the greatest miracle was his unwavering belief in the power of imagination and reason. As we continue to explore his life, it's clear that Einstein's journey was far from over. The world was only beginning to grasp the significance of his theories, and Einstein himself had much more to contribute to the scientific community. So stay tuned as we delve deeper into how this remarkable man continued to shape our understanding of the universe in ways that still resonate today. As Einstein navigated the whirlwind of a world still grappling with the implications of his theories, he was about to step into the spotlight in a way that even his wildest thought experiments couldn't have predicted. The universe, it seems, had a penchant for irony. Here was a man who preferred the solitude of his own mind, now catapulted into global celebrity status, a bit like a cat suddenly finding itself the star of a viral video. By the time the 1920s rolled around, Einstein was a household name, and not just in the world of physics. His name was on par with the likes of Charlie Chaplin and Babe Ruth, a scientific rock star in an era that didn't yet know it needed one. But let's not glamorize this transition too much. Fame, even the intellectual kind, is a double-edged sword. For every accolade, there was a critic sharpening their pen or a conspiracy theorist hatching a new plot. Yet Einstein took it all in stride, his sense of humor acting as a buffer against the absurdity of it all. Einstein's journey to the United States in 1921 marked a significant turn in his life. Invited to lecture at Princeton University, he was greeted with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for movie stars and politicians. The New York Times reported that his arrival was met with a frenzy, like some conquering hero. And why not? Here was the man who had rewritten the laws of the universe, arriving on American shores with nothing but his violin and a suitcase full of theories. While Einstein was rubbing elbows with the intellectual elite, the world around him was anything but stable. The economic boom of the Roaring Twenties was a facade, a gaudy mask hiding the undercurrents of political unrest and economic disparity. The Treaty of Versailles had left Germany in shambles, its economy a fragile skeleton of its former self. Hyperinflation was so rampant that Germans were using wheelbarrows of cash to buy a loaf of bread. A grim reality that made Einstein's theoretical work seem both crucial and disconnected from everyday suffering. But Einstein wasn't one to shy away from the political arena. He was an outspoken pacifist, a stance that was about as popular as a lead balloon in post-war Europe. He advocated for disarmament and was a vocal critic of nationalism, which didn't exactly endear him to the rising tide of fascists. In a world teetering on the brink of ideological warfare, Einstein's voice was a rare beacon of reason. He once quipped, "Nationalism is an infantile disease. It is the measles of mankind." Sharp, isn't it? But it's the kind of cutting clarity that only Einstein could deliver with a straight face. Einstein's activism wasn't just lip service. He put his money where his mouth was. He became actively involved with the Zionist movement, supporting the establishment of a Jewish homeland. Though he was ambivalent about the idea of a Jewish state, fearing it might lead to nationalism, he championed the creation of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. He saw education as the key to peace and progress, a belief as unshakable as his aversion to socks. Now, let's talk about those interviews. Einstein's interactions with the media were legendary, a masterclass in how to handle fame with wit and grace. When asked to explain his theory of relativity in layman's terms, he reportedly quipped, "Put your hand on a hot stove for a minute, and it seems like an hour. Sit with a pretty girl for an hour, and it seems like a minute." That's relativity. It's the kind of explanation that makes you smile even as it makes you think. Despite the chaos of the Roaring Twenties, Einstein maintained a remarkable balance between his scientific pursuits and his role as an accidental cultural icon. He was a man of contradictions, an introvert who thrived in the spotlight, a pacifist in a world obsessed with war, and a man of science who understood the human need for stories and myths. Yet he never lost sight of who he was. A thinker first and foremost, a man driven by curiosity rather than accolades. Einstein's time in America wasn't just about lectures and accolades. It was also a period of personal exploration and growth. He mingled with the intellectual giants of the time, artists, writers, politicians, people who were shaping the cultural landscape. He forged friendships with the likes of Charlie Chaplin, sharing a mutual admiration for each other's work. At a dinner party, Chaplin reportedly told Einstein, "The people cheer me because they all understand me, and they cheer you because no one understands you." To which Einstein, ever the quick wit, replied, "Ah, but we both make them laugh." As the 1930s dawned, the world was changing once again, and not for the better. The Great Depression hit with a force that made the roaring 20s seem like a distant memory. Unemployment rates soared, and the global economy faltered. In Germany, the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party cast a dark shadow. For Einstein, a Jew and a vocal critic of fascism, the writing was on the wall. Remaining in Europe was becoming increasingly dangerous. In 1933, Einstein made the difficult decision to leave Germany for good. He settled in Princeton, New Jersey, where he accepted a position at the Institute for Advanced Study. It was a bittersweet transition, leaving behind the continent that had shaped him, yet embracing a new chapter in a country that offered refuge and opportunity. Einstein's move to the United States wasn't just a geographical shift. It was a new beginning. He became an American citizen in 1940, a gesture that signaled his commitment to his new home. Yet, he remained deeply connected to the events unfolding in Europe, using his platform to advocate for refugees and warn of the dangers posed by the Nazi regime. His letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt in 1939, urging the development of atomic research in response to Germany's burgeoning nuclear program, was a pivotal moment that led to the Manhattan Project. It was a paradox that weighed heavily on him, contributing to the creation of a weapon he hoped would never be used. Despite the mounting global tensions, Einstein's humor remained intact. During a televised interview, when asked how it felt to be the smartest man alive, he reportedly shrugged and said, "I don't know. You'll have to ask Nikola Tesla." It was a classic Einstein move, deflecting the spotlight while acknowledging another brilliant mind. Einstein's later years in America were marked by a quieter, more reflective period. He continued his scientific work, but his focus shifted towards broader philosophical questions about science and society. He became a vocal proponent of civil rights, lending his support to the NAACP and corresponding with W.E.B. Du Bois. He saw racial inequality as another form of the nationalism he so despised, and he wasn't afraid to speak out against it, even when it was unpopular. As the world hurtled towards the chaos of World War II, Einstein remained a steadfast advocate for peace. He joined the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists, working to promote nuclear disarmament and prevent the proliferation of nuclear weapons. It was a cause that would dominate much of his later life, a testament to his belief in the power of science to serve humanity rather than destroy it. Yet, despite his serious endeavors, Einstein never lost his playful spirit. He once said, "Creativity is intelligence having fun," a mantra that seemed to guide his life. Whether he was playing his violin, engaging in lively debates, or simply sharing a laugh with friends, Einstein understood the importance of joy and wonder in a world that often seemed dark. Einstein's rise to global fame and his journey to the United States were characterized by a remarkable blend of intellectual brilliance and human warmth. He was a man who defied the conventions of his time, challenging both scientific and societal norms with a grace and wit that endeared him to millions. As we continue to explore his life, it's clear that Einstein's story is far from over. His impact on science, culture, and politics continues to resonate, a testament to the power of a curious mind and a generous heart. Stay tuned for the final chapter, where we'll delve into Einstein's enduring legacy and the lessons his life holds for us today. From his groundbreaking scientific contributions to his tireless advocacy for peace and justice, Einstein's journey offers a timeless reminder of the power of imagination and the importance of standing up for what's right. As we dive into the twilight of Einstein's life, it's clear the man never quite fit into the mold, any mold, really. He was that rare breed of genius who remained surprisingly down to earth, even as his theories soared above it. The 1940s and 50s saw Einstein settled in Princeton, the small town that became his home away from the complexities of a war-torn Europe. Here, he found a semblance of peace, and not just because the town's biggest headline was usually about a local bake sale rather than global catastrophe. By the time of his death in 1955, Einstein had left an indelible mark on the world, and not just in the realm of physics. His legacy was as multifaceted as his theories, ranging from the scientific to the social, with a sprinkle of the downright quirky. Let's tackle these facets one by one, starting with his contributions to the atomic age. Though Einstein had laid the theoretical groundwork for nuclear fission with E equals mc2, he was acutely aware of the Pandora's box it had opened. His correspondence with fellow physicist Niels Bohr was a chess match of wit and intellect, debating quantum mechanics and wrestling with the ethical implications of their discoveries. The irony that his work paved the way for the bomb that would forever alter warfare wasn't lost on him. He once remarked, "I do not know with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones." A darkly humorous prediction, but one that underscored his fears about the future. Einstein's concerns weren't confined to theoretical discussions. He was instrumental in founding the Emergency Committee of Atomic Scientists in 1946, alongside the likes of Leo Szilard. The committee's mission was clear: to advocate for nuclear disarmament and educate the public on the dangers of atomic warfare. They weren't just a bunch of eggheads in lab coats. They were on a crusade to prevent humanity from blowing itself into the Stone Age. Yet, despite the gravity of his work, Einstein never shed his playful nature. His correspondence with other intellectual heavyweights of the time was peppered with humor and humility. He wasn't above poking fun at himself, writing to his friend Max Born, "I have no special talents. I am only passionately curious." It's the kind of modesty that makes you want to roll your eyes because, let's face it, Einstein was special, and he knew it, but his self-effacing charm made it hard to hold it against him. Then there's the mythic aura that surrounds Einstein, the kind that tends to blur the lines between fact and legend. Contrary to popular belief, he didn't fail math as a child, an idea that might make struggling students feel better about their own report cards. In reality, he was a math whiz by the age of 12, diving into calculus the way most kids dive into comic books. But hey, who doesn't love a good underdog story, even if it's more fiction than fact? And let's not forget the iconic image of Einstein sticking out his tongue, a snapshot that encapsulates his aversion to taking himself too seriously. Taken on his 72nd birthday, it was a candid moment that perfectly captured his playful spirit, a reminder that even the greatest minds need a good laugh now and then. This photo became a staple of dorm room walls and meme culture, symbolizing both genius and irreverence. Einstein's quirks weren't just for show, though. They were an integral part of who he was, influencing his approach to life and science. His disdain for conventional attire, yep, still no socks, was more than just a fashion statement. It was a reflection of his broader rejection of societal norms. He once quipped, "A man should look for what is, and not for what he thinks should be." It was this ability to see things as they were, rather than as they appeared, that allowed him to revolutionize our understanding of the universe. And while we're myth-busting, let's tackle the idea that Einstein was a lone wolf in his scientific endeavors. In truth, he built upon the work of predecessors like Isaac Newton and James Clerk Maxwell, and his theories were constantly scrutinized and refined by his contemporaries. Science is, after all, a collaborative pursuit, and Einstein was never shy about acknowledging the giants on whose shoulders he stood. So, what is it about Einstein that keeps us fascinated decades after his death? Perhaps it's that he embodied the curious dichotomy of being both an ordinary man and an extraordinary mind. He was fallible, charmingly so, yet his contributions to science were nothing short of monumental. His life was a testament to the power of curiosity and imagination, proof that even the most profound discoveries can spring from simple, playful questions. Einstein's legacy is not just in his theories, but in his unwavering belief in the human capacity for wonder and discovery. He once said, "The important thing is not to stop questioning. Curiosity has its own reason for existing." It's a sentiment that resonates across time, urging us to keep questioning, keep exploring, and never settle for the easy answers. In the end, Einstein's life was a symphony of contradictions. a man of science who understood the art of living. He danced between the worlds of the tangible and the theoretical, the serious and the whimsical, leaving a legacy that continues to inspire. Whether you're a budding physicist, a history buff, or simply someone who enjoys a good story, Einstein's journey offers a timeless reminder that even the most complex puzzles can be approached with a sense of play. As we wrap up this exploration of Einstein's life, let's take a moment to reflect on the lessons he leaves behind. In a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain, his story reminds us that clarity can be found in curiosity, and that a sense of humor might just be the best tool we have to navigate the mysteries of existence. So the next time you find yourself pondering the vastness of the cosmos, or simply trying to make sense of your own corner of the world, channel a bit of Einstein's spirit. Ask questions. Embrace the unexpected. And for goodness sake, never underestimate the value of a good pair of socks, or the choice to go without them. In the sun-drenched sands of ancient Egypt, where camels were the only traffic jam and pyramids the original skyscrapers, a certain prince was about to shake things up more than a sandstorm on the Nile. Enter Akhenaten, a pharaoh whose early days were as golden as the sands themselves, yet tinged with a rebellious streak that would soon send ripples across the kingdom like a pebble tossed in the Nile. Now, this isn't your typical fairy tale of a young ruler. It's more of a high-stakes game of religious poker, where Akhenaten decided to bet it all on one god, Aten, and change the rules of the game entirely. Born around 1380 BCE, Akhenaten wasn't initially in line to be the star of the Egyptian show. He was the second son of Amenhotep III and Queen Tut, meaning his older brother, Thutmose, was the heir apparent. But when Thutmose checked out early, Akhenaten was thrust into the limelight, ready or not. And by 1353 BCE, he was pharaoh, a role that came with its own set of perks and headaches. Think of it as inheriting a Fortune 500 company and a reality TV show all at once. The Egypt young Akhenaten inherited was a land of tradition and stability. The Egyptians were living the good life, basking in the spoils of a wealthy, sun-soaked empire. Politically, Egypt was the heavyweight champion in the ancient world, flexing its muscles from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north. But while the country was partying like it was 1399 BCE, the young pharaoh had other plans. Akhenaten wasn't content with the status quo. He had grand, some might say wild, ideas about religion. Picture this: a civilization steeped in polytheism with a pantheon of deities as colorful as their hieroglyphs. There was Ra, the sun god, Osiris, the god of the afterlife, and a whole host of others ready to grant your everyday wishes. But Akhenaten, he thought, why have a dozen gods when you can have just one? And thus began his radical spiritual experiment, monotheism, starring Aten, the sun disk, as the sole deity. Now, you might be wondering why Akhenaten would throw the theological kitchen sink at Egyptian tradition. Was it divine inspiration, political strategy, or just an ancient midlife crisis? Historians are still debating that, but one thing's for sure: Akhenaten's Aten-centric vision was both revolutionary and, shall we say, not exactly popular with the masses. The priesthood, particularly those fattened by the offerings to Ammon, were less than thrilled at this new religious diet. Imagine telling a group of investment bankers that their whole industry was being replaced by a single app. It's not going to win you any popularity contests. As Akhenaten pushed forward with his reforms, the costs began to mount, both literally and figuratively. Moving the religious capital to a brand new city, Akhenaten, modern-day Amarna, was like deciding to build a new Vatican in the middle of nowhere, with a fraction of the resources and none of the modern amenities. The construction alone was a logistical nightmare, with costs that would make any ancient accountant weep. But Akhenaten was undeterred, convinced that he was destined to be the earthly reflection of the sun god Aten. Of course, such ambition came with its own set of consequences. Diplomatic relations took a hit as foreign vassals started questioning Egypt's stability under this sun-worshipping, god-soloing pharaoh. And domestically, the murmurs of discontent grew louder. The priests of Ammon, feeling their power slip like sand through fingers, started plotting, while the average Egyptian, who just wanted to keep the Nile flowing and the bread baking, found themselves caught in the middle of a cosmic tug-of-war. It wasn't all doom and gloom, though. Akhenaten's reign also sparked a cultural renaissance, as artists and architects found new freedom to express themselves under his patronage. The art of the Amarna period, with its naturalistic and fluid forms, was a breath of fresh air compared to the stiff, formalized styles of previous dynasties. And the city of Akhenaten, with its open plazas and sun-drenched temples, was a testament to Akhenaten's vision, even if it was a bit of an architectural gamble. But as with all great gambles, the stakes were high, and Akhenaten's vision would soon face challenges that not even the most creative hieroglyphs could predict. Whether he was a visionary or a madman, or perhaps a bit of both, Akhenaten's story was far from over. As the sun set on his early reign, the real test of his radical ideas was just beginning. Stay tuned, because the ancient Egyptian drama is about to heat up even more than a midday stroll through the Sahara. As the sun set on Akhenaten's early reign, the real test of his radical ideas was just beginning. Akhenaten, the pharaoh who decided Egypt needed a new architectural marvel to match his theological rebranding, wasn't just content with a few renovations here and there. No, he wanted a whole new city, Akhenaten, the city of the horizon of Aten. You know, just a little weekend project like building a city from scratch in the middle of a desert. Let's talk logistics. The construction of Akhenaten, known today as Amarna, was nothing short of a Herculean task. Imagine trying to build a metropolis without the convenience of cranes, cement mixers, or even a decent cup of coffee to keep the workers going. Akhenaten wanted the city up and running faster than you could say sun disk. So he summoned thousands of laborers, artisans, and officials to transform a barren stretch of land into a bustling urban center. Now, we're not talking about a village here. Akhenaten was meant to be a sprawling city stretching over 8 miles along the Nile, with grand temples, opulent palaces, and quarters for the common folk. The timeline, just a few years. That's right. While modern city planners might spend that long just deciding on a color palette, Akhenaten had his new city sketched out and rising from the desert sands in record time. And as with any ambitious construction project, the costs were astronomical. The treasury, once comfortably padded by Egypt's wealth, began to feel the pinch. Resources that could have gone to, say, maintaining Egypt's impressive military or shoring up international relations were instead funneled into Akhenaten. We're talking about an economic black hole that sucked in gold, manpower, and possibly the collective patience of an entire nation. Now, you think moving an entire government from one city to another would be a nightmare of epic proportions, and you'd be right. There were no moving vans here, just a caravan of officials, scribes, priests, and their families trudging across the desert with everything they could carry. Picture a bureaucratic exodus where every misstep could mean leaving behind crucial papyri, or worse, the royal pets. The chaos was almost comedic. It's as if Akhenaten had thrown a gigantic, mandatory office relocation party and forgot to hire a caterer. And what about the people? The average Egyptian, who might have been perfectly content with their life in Thebes, suddenly found themselves uprooted, their lives packed into makeshift carts. The sight must have been something. A mishmash of harried government officials, disgruntled priests, and artisans hauling their tools like reluctant participants in the worst team-building exercise ever conceived. Amidst the dust and the din, you could almost hear the grumblings, all this for a sun god. Yet Akhenaten's vision of Akhenaten wasn't just about bricks and monuments. It was a stage for his revolutionary religious vision. In the heart of the city stood the great temple of Aten, where rituals were performed under the open sky, no ceilings to separate the faithful from their god. This was no accidental design choice. It symbolized the direct connection between Aten, Akhenaten, and the people, a radical departure from the shadowy, incense-filled sanctuaries of other gods. And while this might have seemed spiritually liberating to some, Others struggled with the loss of the comforting rituals and familiar deities that had been part of their lives for generations. The economic impact, however, was as clear as the Egyptian skies. Traditional temples across the land saw their revenues dwindle as Akhenaten's policies redirected offerings to his new city. This was the ancient equivalent of diverting funds from established institutions to a shiny new startup. And unsurprisingly, it didn't sit well with everyone. The priesthoods of other gods, particularly those worshipping Ammon, the previous top dog in the divine hierarchy, watched helplessly as their influence waned. While Akhenaten was busy sunbathing in his new city, Egypt's political and military grip began to loosen. The empire's northern territories, once tightly held under Egyptian control, started slipping away as local governors sensed weakness in the pharaoh's preoccupation with his cosmic vision. Akhenaten's focus on Akhenaten might have been all-consuming, but for those keeping an eye on Egypt's borders, it was a distraction with potentially dire consequences. But let's not forget the flip side of this coin. For those artists and architects who made the trek to Akhenaten, the city was a playground of creative freedom. The Amarna style, with its exaggerated forms and vibrant colors, broke away from the stiff, formulaic art of the past. Royal family portraits became more intimate, showcasing the pharaoh and his family in surprisingly human moments, holding children, playing with them, even stealing a kiss or two. These were not just static gods on thrones, but a family in motion, basking in the divine sunlight. Despite its short-lived glory, Akhenaten was a testament to Akhenaten's audacity and vision, as well as an object lesson in the delicate balance between ambition and practicality. The city rose and fell within a couple of decades, a blink of an eye in the grand sweep of history, yet it left an indelible mark on the cultural and religious landscape of Egypt. And as Akhenaten continued to dream of a world united under the sun, the rest of Egypt quietly wondered how long the sunshine would last. Because while Akhenaten shimmered in the desert like a mirage, the challenges of reality were gathering just beyond the horizon, waiting for their moment to cast a shadow over the pharaoh's sunlit dreams. As the story unfolds, stay tuned for the next chapter in this epic saga. Because if you think building a city was a challenge, wait until you see what comes next. And if you think building a city was a challenge, wait until you meet the supporting cast in Akhenaten's real-life drama. His family. The spotlight here is on Nefertiti, Akhenaten's wife, who wasn't just any queen but arguably the Beyoncé of ancient Egypt, graceful, influential, and eternally enigmatic. Her name means the beautiful one has come, a title that sounds like it could headline a modern-day fashion magazine. Nefertiti was more than just a pretty face, though. She was a key player in Akhenaten's religious revolution, co-starring with him in the worship of Aten. Now, forget any notion of a passive queen watching from the sidelines. Nefertiti was right there next to Akhenaten, performing religious ceremonies and possibly even ruling as a co-regent. Some historians speculate she even took on the role of pharaoh under the name Neferneferuaten. Talk about a power couple. Their portraits adorn the walls of temples and tombs, showing them in intimate family scenes, a radical departure from the often stoic and detached depictions of previous pharaohs and their queens. Speaking of family, let's talk about the brood. Akhenaten and Nefertiti had 6 daughters, a detail that might sound like a historical footnote, but actually played into the public relations spectacle that was their reign. These daughters were depicted alongside their parents in countless artworks, often with exaggerated, elongated features, a hallmark of the Amarna style. This wasn't just a matter of artistic taste, it was a bold statement. By showcasing their family life so prominently, Akhenaten and Nefertiti were presenting themselves as the divine family on earth, close-knit and blessed by Aten. It was like the ancient Egyptian version of a royal Instagram account, designed to project an image of unity and divine favor. But let's not get too swept up in the romanticism. While the art shows a picture-perfect family, the reality might have been more complicated. For starters, the heavy presence of daughters and the conspicuous absence of sons in the art raises questions. Was this a choice, or was Akhenaten's family life not as neatly tied up as the depictions suggest? The lack of a male heir during Akhenaten's lifetime would eventually pose a succession problem, something no amount of artistic flourish could gloss over. And then there's the mystery of Nefertiti's sudden disappearance from historical records around the 12th year of Akhenaten's reign. Did she die? Was she disgraced? Or did she simply step back from the limelight? Theories abound, but concrete evidence is as elusive as the wind over the desert dunes. What we do know is that around this time, another figure, Smenkhkare, pops up, possibly a co-regent or even Nefertiti in disguise. It's a historical riddle wrapped in a sun-drenched enigma. The artistic flourishes of Akhenaten's reign weren't confined to family portraits. The new Amarna style broke away from the rigid, idealized forms of previous dynasties, embracing a more naturalistic and fluid approach. Pharaohs were shown with elongated limbs, prominent bellies, and exaggerated facial features. Some have speculated this was an artistic choice to emphasize divine otherness. Others suggest it might reflect real health issues Akhenaten faced. Either way, it was a stark departure from the chiseled perfection of earlier representations. The exaggerated depictions extended beyond the pharaoh's royal visage. The entire royal family was shown in equally unconventional ways, which some interpreted as an attempt to convey a divine connection to Aten, transcending normal human appearance. But let's not kid ourselves. These artistic liberties were also a strategic PR move. By breaking from tradition, Akhenaten was sending a clear message. This was a new era, and he was a new kind of pharaoh. However, these changes weren't without their critics. The radical departure from traditional art forms left many scratching their heads and possibly rolling their eyes. Imagine the chatter among the artisans of the day. Did you see that new statue of the pharaoh? Looks like he swallowed a whole watermelon. Humor aside, this shift was part of Akhenaten's broader attempt to reshape Egyptian society, using art as a tool to reinforce his religious and political agenda. But let's not forget, art wasn't just about lofty ideals and divine imagery. It was also about control. By commissioning art that depicted himself and his family in this unique style, Akhenaten was literally reshaping how the world saw him. It was a masterclass in ancient branding, crafting a visual narrative that aligned with his theological innovations. The message was clear: out with the old gods and in with the new sunlit vision. This brings us back to the broader political implications of Akhenaten's family life and artistic experiments. By positioning his family as the earthly embodiment of Aten's divine light, Akhenaten was not only reinforcing his religious reforms, but also solidifying his political power. It was a savvy move, but one fraught with risks. The more Akhenaten doubled down on Aten and his family's role in this new order, the more he alienated the traditional power structures that had long supported the pharaoh's rule. The priesthood of Amun, sidelined and stripped of its influence, wasn't exactly sitting idle. While Akhenaten basked in the sunshine of his own making, these displaced priests were quietly waiting for an opportunity to reclaim their place in the religious and political landscape. And as the pharaoh's focus remained fixed on his sun-drenched city and family, the seeds of discontent were being sown across the empire. In the end, Akhenaten's family life and artistic endeavors were as much about control and propaganda as they were about genuine devotion. They were tools in a larger strategy to reshape Egyptian society, tools that were as brilliant as they were brittle. And as the sun set on Akhenaten, the question lingered: would this bold experiment endure, or would it crumble like a sandcastle in the desert wind? The story of Akhenaten, Nefertiti, and their children is a fascinating blend of myth and reality, art and politics, love and power. It's a reminder that, throughout history, the line between legend and truth is often as thin as a papyrus scroll. And as we continue to explore their legacy, we'll see just how far the ripples of their reign would spread, influencing not just their immediate successors, but the very fabric of Egyptian civilization itself. Stay tuned, because the next chapter is about to reveal the challenges that lay ahead as this sunlit dynasty faced the shadows creeping over the horizon. As the sands of history continued to shift under Akhenaten's sunlit dreams, the real test of his reign was unfolding not in the artfully carved limestone of Akhenaten, but in the fragile pages of international diplomacy. You see, while Akhenaten was busy playing architect and theologian, the rest of the ancient world didn't pause for a sun's salutation. Enter the Amarna letters, a collection of clay tablets that serve as a window into the diplomatic drama of the 14th century BCE, a kind of ancient email chain, if you will, filled with all the politeness and passive-aggressive undertones you'd expect. These letters reveal a rather peculiar side of Akhenaten's rule. Picture it: foreign rulers from the Near East sitting in their respective palaces, pensively scratching their heads as they tried to decipher Egypt's new foreign policy, or lack thereof. Akhenaten's attention was so laser-focused on Aten and his architectural marvels that international relations started resembling a poorly managed group chat. Messages left unread, complaints piling up, and plenty of, "Did you get my last message?" vibes. Among these correspondences, you'll find rulers from places like Babylon, Assyria, and the Hittite Empire, ancient heavyweights in their own right, trying to maintain alliances and trade partnerships. The letters are a mix of the mundane, requests for gold, and the mildly humorous, reminders of promised marriages that seem to have slipped Akhenaten's mind. One notable exchange involves Tushratta, king of Mitanni, whose tone shifts from friendly to frustrated as his requests for gold and a daughter-in-law go unanswered. It's the Bronze Age version of being ghosted, and Tushratta was not amused. Now, why was Akhenaten so cavalier about foreign affairs? Historians speculate that his religious reforms and the monumental task of building Akhenaten consumed most of his attention and resources. The economy was already stretched thinner than a papyrus scroll, and he seemed to gamble that Egypt's long-standing reputation would keep the wolves at bay. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Egypt's foreign policy under Akhenaten was like a sandcastle at high tide, slowly eroding as regional governors and vassal states sensed the pharaoh's preoccupation. The empire's outer territories, once secured by the might and prestige of pharaohs past, began slipping through his fingers. The Hittites, in particular, saw an opportunity in Egypt's distraction, and they weren't shy about flexing their muscles in the region. It was a classic case of when the cat's away, the mice will play, and the Hittites were playing for keeps. But let's not lay all the blame on Akhenaten's sun-drenched shoulders. The Amarna letters also reveal a world caught in transition. The Bronze Age was a time of shifting alliances and emerging powers, and Egypt's traditional methods of control, tribute, marriages, and military might were being tested. While Akhenaten's predecessors had kept a firm grip on foreign territories through military campaigns and strategic marriages, his decision to focus inward left these bonds frayed. The letters are peppered with complaints about unfulfilled promises, missing dowries, and delays in military support. It's like the ancient world's version of leaving someone on read. Despite these challenges, Akhenaten's inward focus did have its advantages. The cultural and artistic renaissance of the Amarna period, fueled by his religious zeal, was nothing short of revolutionary. But this came at a cost. The resources funneled into his grand vision left the military underfunded and underprepared. It's the classic tale of robbing Peter to pay Aten, and it left Egypt vulnerable on the international stage. Let's not forget the domestic scene, where Akhenaten's religious policies were causing as much of a stir as a Nile flood. The power and influence of the traditional priesthood were being siphoned off like water from a leaking jar. The priests, particularly those of Ammon, were watching their influence dwindle as offerings and attention were redirected to Aten. It was the ancient equivalent of a major corporate restructuring, and you can bet they weren't sending Akhenaten any thank-you notes. Meanwhile, the average Egyptian was caught in the crossfire of these sweeping changes. For many, religion wasn't just a matter of faith. It was woven into the fabric of daily life. The shift to monotheism under Aten disrupted everything from religious festivals to burial practices, leaving people adrift in a spiritual landscape as unfamiliar as the new city rising in the desert. Imagine being told that your entire belief system was outdated and that you now had to worship the sun disk exclusively. It's like being told to abandon your favorite app for a new, untested version, one that nobody seemed to enjoy using. Amidst this domestic turmoil, Akhenaten's diplomatic faux pas continued. The Amarna letters offer a glimpse into the geopolitical chessboard where Egypt, once the king, was now looking more like a pawn. Neighboring states grew bolder, and internal dissent simmered as Akhenaten's vision for a unified religious state clashed with the realities of governance and tradition. It was a classic case of idealism meeting pragmatism, and the results were as messy as you'd expect. Yet, for all the chaos, there was a certain romance to Akhenaten's reign, a glimpse of what might have been had his vision been fully realized. The art, the architecture, the radical religious reforms all painted a picture of a ruler who dared to dream differently. But in the harsh light of day, the practicalities of ruling an empire as vast and complex as Egypt required more than just dreams. They required diplomacy, military might, and a keen understanding of the world beyond one's borders. As Akhenaten's reign continued, the world watched with a mix of fascination and skepticism. Could Egypt's sun-worshipping Pharaoh maintain his grip on power, or would the forces arrayed against him prove too formidable? The answer lay not in the sunlit corridors of Akhenaten, but in the shifting sands of diplomacy and the hard realities of the ancient world. And as the sun set on Akhenaten's ambitious but turbulent rule, the stage was set for a new chapter in Egypt's storied history, one that would see the return of old gods and the restoration of old orders. But that, dear listeners, is a tale for another day. Stay tuned as we continue to unravel the fascinating saga of Akhenaten and the legacy he left behind. As the sands of time continue to shift, we find ourselves at the end of Akhenaten's ambitious, sun-drenched saga. His reign, a fevered dream of religious reform and artistic revolution, shone brilliantly, but ultimately burned out faster than you can say solar eclipse. Let's get into the juicy details of what happened when Akhenaten took his final bow, leaving the stage for the next act in Egypt's grand historical theatre. So Akhenaten exits, stage left, around 1336 BCE, and almost immediately the curtain falls on his grand experiment. The subsequent rulers wasted no time in sweeping his reforms under the proverbial rug. It's as if they couldn't dismantle his sun-worshipping legacy fast enough. His successor, the enigmatic Smenkhkare, barely leaves a blip on the historical radar before Tutankhamun takes the throne. Ah, Tutankhamun, the boy king who, thanks to a tomb full of treasures, has become more famous than a pharaoh with his own viga's residency. Tutankhamun's reign marks the beginning of the return to traditional religious practices. Just 9 years of rule, yet he oversaw what must have felt like Egypt's biggest rebranding campaign. Out went Aten, and back in came Ammon, along with the rest of the polytheistic pantheon. Even the capital city was moved back to Thebes, leaving Akhenaten to slowly fade into the desert sands, like a forgotten ghost town of the ancient world. Imagine a city built for the express purpose of worshipping the sun being abandoned to the elements. Ironic, no. The speed at which Akhenaten's reforms were reversed is a testament to the resilience of Egypt's traditional structures. The priests of Ammon, sidelined and simmering for years, must have felt like they'd won the lottery. Not only did they regain their power, but they also ensured Akhenaten's memory was systematically erased, or at least tried to. His name was scrubbed from monuments, and his statues were defaced. Talk about a comprehensive PR cleanup operation. It's as if they were attempting to delete his very existence from the historical record. Delete history cache, if you will. But here's where things get interesting. Despite the rapid reversal, Akhenaten's legacy didn't vanish completely. Like a persistent pop-up ad, his ideas lingered in the cultural consciousness of Egypt. The artistic and architectural innovations of the Amarna period, with their unique flair and expressive forms, left a lasting mark. Future generations, even those who disavowed his religious reforms, couldn't help but be influenced by the creative explosion he had sparked. There's a lesson there about the staying power of art, even when the ideology behind it has crumbled like a badly built pyramid. And what about his religious revolution? It failed spectacularly, sure, but it was also centuries ahead of its time. Monotheism would eventually become a major force in the world, albeit in a different form and context. Akhenaten's attempt at a singular divine focus was a bold precursor to the religious shifts that would sweep through the Middle East and beyond in the coming millennia. Was he a visionary or a fool? Perhaps a bit of both. His reign serves as a reminder that innovation often walks a tightrope between genius and folly. The economic and political realities of Akhenaten's reign are a sobering counterpoint to the romance of his vision. The cost of building Akhenaten and supporting his religious reforms drained the state coffers and weakened Egypt's international standing. It's a classic case of ambition outpacing resources, a lesson that echoes through the corridors of history. When you bet the kingdom on a new sun god, you better have a strong contingency plan for those cloudy days. As for the historical debate, Akhenaten's reign is a goldmine of speculation and intrigue. Was his religious zeal a genuine spiritual awakening, or simply a shrewd political maneuver to consolidate power? Did he sincerely believe in Aten's supremacy, or was it a convenient way to undermine the entrenched priesthood of Ammon? The truth is likely a complex cocktail of faith, politics, and personal ambition, mixed in a chalice as ornate as any from the Amarna period. And what are the lessons learned from Akhenaten's reign? First, history shows us that radical change, especially in deeply rooted societies, tends to provoke equally strong reactions. Akhenaten's sweeping reforms were met with resistance that eventually led to their undoing, a cautionary tale for any would-be reformer. Second, his story is a potent reminder of the fragility of power. Even a pharaoh, supposedly divine, could find his legacy unraveled within a generation. It's a humbling thought for anyone who considers themselves untouchable. In the end, Akhenaten's reign was a brilliant, flawed experiment, an epic tale of vision meeting reality in a spectacular clash. His sunlit dreams may have been eclipsed, but the shadows they cast have persisted, enticing historians and capturing imaginations for centuries. Whether you see him as a misguided zealot or a pioneering visionary, Akhenaten's story is a testament to the enduring power of human ambition and the indelible marks it leaves on the tapestry of history. So as we close this chapter on Akhenaten, let's remember the pharaoh who dared to dream big, even if reality had other plans. His legacy is a reminder that while the sun may set on even the grandest visions, the echoes of those dreams can illuminate the path for generations to come. And with that, dear listeners, we leave Akhenaten to bask in the eternal glow of history's spotlight, his sunlit ambitions forever etched in the annals of time, casting their unique glow on the desert sands of the past. Napoleon III, a name that probably gets a polite nod on a history quiz, but isn't likely to ignite a spark of recognition like his more bombastic predecessor. Yet here he was, ready to stage his own drama on the European stage. Born Charles-Louis Napoleon Bonaparte in April 1808. Yes, another Napoleon. Our protagonist was the nephew of the original Napoleon Bonaparte, the man who once played a grand game of risk with Europe and nearly won it all. But while Uncle Napoleon was out there reshaping maps and upsetting monarchs, young Louis had his own dynamic path to power. Fast forward to 1848, a year that was as good as any for political upheaval. Think of it as the 19th century version of a global mood swing. Across Europe, revolutions were popping off like fireworks on Bastille Day. In France, the February Revolution kicked out King Louis Philippe, creating a power vacuum that would have swallowed up an ordinary politician. But our Louis wasn't just any politician. He saw an opportunity to ride this revolutionary wave all the way to the top, surfing his way into the presidency of the newly formed Second Republic with the zeal of a man who had studied his uncle's playbook and added a few annotations of his own. Now, Louis Napoleon's rise wasn't just blind luck or a happy accident. He'd made a couple of attempts earlier, in 1836 and 1840, to snag power for himself, both of which failed spectacularly. During these comic opera attempts, he managed to get himself imprisoned in a French fortress, proving that even future emperors are not immune to the occasional faceplint. But as they say, third time's the charm, and in 1848 he finally got it right, becoming the first president of France. His campaign was a curious blend of nostalgia for the old Napoleonic glory and promises of a stable, democratic future, an odd cocktail, but one that certainly did the trick. 4 years later, Louis Napoleon decided that being president just wasn't cutting it. He wanted to upgrade, and so he did, by staging a coup d'etat in December 1851. It was a classic move straight out of the Bonaparte playbook, complete with military force and a dash of political drama. The people of France, either smitten by the idea of another Napoleon or simply tired of the revolving door of political experiments, accepted him as Emperor Napoleon III in 1852. And just like that, the French Second Empire was born. But let's not get too carried away by the romance of it all. Being an emperor in 19th century Europe wasn't all about wearing fabulous uniforms and attending grand balls. It was a time of intense political maneuvering, where the continent's map was as volatile as a soap opera plot twist. The Congress of Vienna in 1815 had drawn lines and created balance, but by the time Napoleon III came along, those lines were already starting to blur. Napoleon III had a grand vision, to restore France to its former glory and to make it the center of European politics. But here's where reality throws in a curveball. Unlike his uncle, Napoleon III's military prowess was, let's say, questionable at best. He had ambitions to match his uncle's, but his execution often left much to be desired. His first major military blunder came during the Crimean War in the 1850s, where he decided to team up with Britain and the Ottoman Empire against Russia. The war itself was a logistical nightmare, with supply lines stretched thinner than a Parisian fashion model and the soldiers suffering more from disease than from bullets. Despite these setbacks, Napoleon III managed to hold onto power. His charisma, coupled with a knack for political propaganda, kept the French people on his side. He understood the power of the press and used it to bolster his image, presenting himself as a man of the people, even while donning the imperial crown. Yet it was a balancing act of epic proportions, with the emperor constantly juggling his ambitions and the harsh realities of 19th century geopolitics. The political landscape of Europe during his reign was a tangled web of alliances, enmities, and rivalries. The balance of power was a teetering seesaw, with Britain, Austria, Prussia, and Russia all vying for dominance. Each had its interests, and Napoleon III's France was determined to be a significant player in this game. The emperor used diplomacy as much as he did military might, trying to position France as a mediator and a peacekeeper, even as he schemed to expand its influence. In this swirling vortex of politics and power, Napoleon III's ambitions would soon lead him to more military exploits that would test his leadership and the very stability of his empire. But for now, his rise to power was nothing short of a historical roller coaster, complete with its ups, downs, and the occasional unexpected loop, the perfect setup for the next chapter in his imperial saga. As Napoleon III settled into his imperial throne, the European political landscape wasn't exactly a calm sea. It was more like a turbulent pool party, and Napoleon III was the guy in the middle trying to make a splash without causing too many waves. Enter the Crimean War of 1853-1856, a conflict as muddled and messy as a teenager's bedroom, where alliances were constantly being reshuffled, and everyone had their eyes on the same prize: power over the declining Ottoman Empire. The Crimean War was essentially a high-stakes game of territorial chess, with Russia eyeing the weakened Ottoman territories like a hungry kid at a buffet. The Ottomans, struggling to keep their empire from unraveling, found unlikely allies in Britain and France. Napoleon III saw this as the perfect opportunity to flex his military muscles and score some much-needed European street cred. After all, he wasn't just trying to emulate Uncle Napoleon's military genius. He wanted to outshine him. In October 1853, the war officially kicked off when the Ottomans declared war on Russia. It was one of those rare moments when the Ottoman Empire found itself on the same page as Britain and France, who were more than happy to back them against the Russian bear. Fast forward to March 1854, and Napoleon III, along with his British buddies, declared war on Russia. It was a massive affair, involving over 1 million men at its peak, with the French and British forces alone sending about 300,000 soldiers to the front lines. Now, here's where things get interesting. The Crimean War wasn't just about men fighting over territory. It was a logistical nightmare. The Allies had to transport troops and supplies over 1,000 miles to the front lines in Crimea, and let's just say, 19th century logistics weren't exactly cutting edge. Picture supply lines stretched thinner than the patience of a parent at a toddler's birthday party. The soldiers faced not just the enemy, but also disease, hunger, and the biting cold. Talk about a hostile work environment. And speaking of hostile environments, let's not forget the infamous charge of the Light Brigade at the Battle of Balaclava in 1854. It's one of those legendary moments that sounds like it was ripped from an epic poem, but in reality, it was a military blunder of mythic proportions. Led by Lord Cardigan, the Light Brigade was ordered to charge directly into a well-fortified Russian artillery position. It was a bit like bringing a knife to a gunfight, except the knife was actually a saber, and the gunfight was, well, a lot more explosive. Out of the original 600 men who charged, over 100 were killed, and nearly 200 were wounded or captured. Despite the disastrous outcome, the charge of the Light Brigade became a symbol of valor and bravery, immortalized in Alfred Lord Tennyson's poem. Yet behind the romanticized bravado lay a grim reality, a costly and pointless mistake that highlighted the chaotic nature of the war. For Napoleon III, the Crimean War was a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it allowed him to strut his stuff on the European stage, proving that France was still a force to be reckoned with. On the other hand, the war exposed the limitations of his military leadership. The logistical chaos and the high human cost were stark reminders that ambition alone doesn't win wars. The war finally dribbled to a close with the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1856. It was a mixed bag for Napoleon III. France had successfully checked Russian ambitions in the Black Sea, and Napoleon's prestige got a bit of a boost. But the cost was staggering, with tens of thousands of soldiers lost to battle and disease. The French economy took a hit too, with the war costing the empire an estimated 360 million francs, a hefty price for a few years of glory and geopolitical maneuvering. Napoleon III's reputation was a patchwork of triumphs and tribulations. The Crimean War solidified his image as a determined, if somewhat flawed, leader. He managed to keep France relevant in the European power play, yet the war's chaotic execution also laid bare the cracks in his imperial facade. It was a lesson in the harsh realities of 19th century warfare, where success was as much about survival as it was about strategy. As the dust settled over the Crimean Peninsula, Napoleon III's ambitions were far from satiated. He had tasted the bittersweet flavor of military success and failure, and the experience only fueled his desire to expand France's influence further. The emperor's next moves would continue to test his leadership and the resilience of the empire he had so carefully crafted. But for now, the Crimean War was a chapter of his reign that would echo through history as a testament to the complex dance between ambition and ability, a dance that Napoleon III would perform on the grand stage of European politics for years to come. But let's not dwell too long on the Crimean War's aftermath, because Napoleon III had new ambitions brewing on the horizon, and they were as Italian as pasta al dente. If Napoleon Bonaparte was the maestro of European chess, Napoleon III was more of a hobbyist, dabbling with a set of mismatched pieces. His next big move, Italy, 1859. A stage where he hoped to play the role of liberator, unifier, and let's be honest, the guy who got invited to all the post-war parties. Italy was a patchwork of kingdoms, duchies, and papal states. Think of it as Europe's jigsaw puzzle missing a few pieces. The Italian peninsula was under the tight grip of Austria, who was about as popular there as an unexpected rainstorm at a picnic. Enter Napoleon III, with visions of Italian unification that were as grand as they were self-serving. He joined forces with the Kingdom of Sardinia, led by the shrewd Count Cavour, whose diplomatic skills could probably sell sand in the Sahara. The Franco-Sardinian alliance was like a high-stakes buddy cop movie, with Sardinia bringing the local knowledge and Napoleon III providing the firepower. Cavour promised to stir the pot and provoke Austria into declaring war, so Napoleon III could sweep in as the knight in shining armor. And guess what? It worked. By April 1859, Austria took the bait and declared war on Sardinia, giving Napoleon the excuse he needed to march in, all guns blazing. The Battle of Magenta, fought on June 4, 1859, was a spectacle of confusion and chaos. With 58,000 French troops facing off against 58,000 Austrians, it was a neatly matched game on paper, but on the ground, it was a muddled mess. Napoleon III was no military genius, and his strategies were as clear as mud. The fighting was brutal, and the town of Magenta became a battlefield worthy of its own opera, with narrow streets turning into bloody mazes. The French finally triumphed, but it was less about brilliant tactics and more about sheer force and a dash of luck. The victory was marked by the bizarre image of the French zouaves, those flamboyant infantrymen in their baggy pants, charging the Austrians with a gusto usually reserved for a can-can line. Despite the carnage, Magenta became an unexpected hit in the pop culture department. The victory was celebrated back in Paris with such fervor that it inspired a new fashion statement, the color magenta, named after the battle. Because nothing says triumph over adversity quite like a new shade of red-purple to add to your wardrobe. But the real fireworks were saved for the Battle of Solferino on June 24, 1859. This showdown was larger in scale and impact, with around 150,000 men clashing in northern Italy. It was a chaotic symphony of bayonets and musket fire, with Napoleon III once again playing conductor, albeit one with a rather loose grip on his baton. The battle was a massive game of who's who, with soldiers struggling to distinguish friend from foe amidst the smoke and cries. The French and Sardinian forces managed to push the Austrians back, but it was a blood-soaked victory, with around 40,000 casualties littering the fields. The horrors of Solferino left a mark not just on the landscape, but on the conscience of one Henry Dunant, a Swiss businessman who happened to witness the aftermath. Moved by the suffering, he would go on to found the International Red Cross, proving that even in the darkest times, a glimmer of humanity can flicker into something world-changing. Back in France, Napoleon III was riding high on a wave of triumph, and the Italians were ecstatic about kicking Austrian boots out of their backyard. But the Emperor's Italian adventure was far from a clean-cut victory. Sure, he helped Sardinia-Piedmont gain Lombardy, but he also left a tangled web of political complications in his wake. The unification of Italy wasn't the seamless narrative Napoleon III had envisioned. Instead, it was a spaghetti bowl of alliances, betrayals, and unforeseen consequences. Napoleon's deals with Austria meant that while Lombardy was handed over to Sardinia, Venetia remained under Austrian control. The Emperor's attempt to play the role of the great unifier was marred by his insistence on keeping the Pope happy, maintaining the status quo in the Papal States. It was as if Napoleon had tried to bake a perfect Italian lasagna, but ended up with a half-baked casserole instead. A bit of this, a bit of that, but ultimately lacking a cohesive finish. The Italian campaign showcased Napoleon III's flair for drama and his knack for entangling himself in international intrigue. His dreams of a unified Italy, free from Austrian control, were noble enough in theory, but his execution often felt like a poorly rehearsed play. The emperor's strategies were riddled with contradictions, as he tried to juggle his ambitions with the complex realities of European politics. In the end, the Italian campaigns highlighted a fundamental truth about Napoleon III. He was a man of grand visions, but often stumbled on the details. His legacy in Italy was a mixed bag, much like the contents of a Roman market stall, some treasures, some trinkets, and a few items you'd rather leave behind. The emperor had managed to leave his mark on the Italian unification process, but his role was more of a catalyst than a creator. As Napoleon III returned to Paris, he was greeted with both applause and skepticism. He had earned his place in the annals of history as a leader who dared to dream big, even if his dreams sometimes outpaced his abilities. The Italian campaigns were a testament to his ambition, his flaws, and his enduring desire to make France the heart of European politics. Yet, as the dust settled over Italy, it became clear that Napoleon III's imperial saga was far from over. New challenges loomed on the horizon, and the emperor would soon find himself tested once again in the relentless theatre of 19th century geopolitics. The ink on the Italian maps had barely dried when Napoleon III decided it was time to expand his imperial ambitions beyond Europe's borders. And what better theatre for another grand performance than the New World? Enter the Mexican adventure of 1861-1867, a venture as ill-conceived as a cat trying to swim. Picture Napoleon III flipping through the pages of his uncle's playbook, landing on the chapter titled World Domination, and thinking, why not Mexico? Now, you might wonder what on earth possessed him to get involved in Mexico, a country half a world away. The answer, as usual, involves a tangled web of politics, economics, and a dash of over-ambition. Mexico, fresh from its own civil strife known as the Reform War, was a country teetering on the brink of economic collapse, with debts as towering as the Alps. France, alongside Britain and Spain, was keen to collect on those debts, like a trio of landlords banging on the door of a tenant who'd skipped rent. In 1861, Napoleon III saw an opportunity. He envisioned a French-backed empire in Mexico that could serve as a counterweight to the United States, growing influence in the Americas. Plus, it would be a neat way to spread French culture and prestige. So he convinced Austrian Archduke Ferdinand Maximilian to take the Mexican throne, despite the fact that Maximilian's previous leadership experience was about as robust as a papier-mâché fortress in a rainstorm. Maximilian's acceptance of the Mexican crown was, let's say, optimistic. He was promised support from the Mexican conservatives and the French military, but it was a bit like diving into a pool without checking if there was any water first. By 1862, French troops had landed in Mexico, and Napoleon's dream seemed to be taking shape. But dreams have a funny way of turning into nightmares. The French forces, numbering about 6,000 initially, faced not only fierce resistance from Mexican Republicans led by President Benito Juárez, but also the logistical nightmare of waging war across an ocean. By the time the French reached Mexico City in 1863, they were knee-deep in a quagmire of guerrilla warfare and tropical diseases, with supply lines stretched as thin as a Parisian crepe. The slapstick series of misfortunes that followed could have been scripted by a comic playwright. French troops found themselves embroiled in a never-ending series of skirmishes with Juárez's forces, who knew the terrain like the back of their hand. It was like trying to catch smoke with a butterfly net, a frustrating, futile exercise with costly results. By 1864, the French expeditionary force had swollen to over 30,000, a staggering number for an overseas campaign, with the cost ballooning faster than a soufflé in a hot oven. Meanwhile, Maximilian, ensconced in his imperial palace, struggled to reconcile his liberal ideals with the conservative power base that had put him on the throne. His attempts to enact reforms, like the abolition of child labor and land reforms for peasants, only alienated his conservative supporters. He was a monarch stuck between a rock and a very hard place, trying to rule a country where every political move was a minefield. And then there was the little matter of the United States. With the American Civil War wrapping up in 1865, the US was none too pleased about a European power setting up shop in its backyard. Under the Monroe Doctrine, the US had a policy of opposing European colonialism in the Americas, and with the North's victory, they could finally pay attention to the French presence in Mexico. The US began to quietly support Juarez, supplying arms and assistance, turning up the heat on Napoleon III. Back in France, the Mexican expedition was becoming increasingly unpopular. The French economy was feeling the pinch, with the campaign costing millions of francs and yielding little return. It was akin to investing in a surefire stock that turned out to be a dud. The French public, initially dazzled by the idea of a new empire, were starting to see it for what it was, an expensive, thankless exercise in futility. By 1866, the writing was on the wall, with mounting pressure from the US and dwindling support at home. Napoleon III began to pull French troops out of Mexico. It was a retreat wrapped in diplomatic language, but make no mistake, it was a retreat. Maximilian, left without his French support, decided to dig in his heels and fight on, a bold but ultimately doomed decision. In 1867, Maximilian's empire crumbled. Captured by Juarez's forces and executed by firing squad, his death marked the end of Napoleon's Mexican misadventure. It was a sobering lesson in the perils of imperial hubris, where ambition outpaced reality with tragic consequences. Napoleon III's judgment, once again, proved questionable, and his domestic standing took a hit as the French public grappled with the costly failure. The Mexican adventure was a costly quagmire that highlighted the limits of 19th century imperialism. It laid bare the harsh realities of overreach, where dreams of glory were dashed against the rocks of logistical nightmares and political miscalculations. For Napoleon III, it was an embarrassing chapter in his imperial saga, one that would haunt him as he continued to navigate the treacherous waters of European politics. Yet, as the dust settled over Mexico, Napoleon III's ambitions were far from extinguished. New challenges loomed on the horizon, and the emperor would soon find himself once again at the center of the storm. The stage was set for further drama, as the relentless theater of 19th century geopolitics demanded its next act. As the curtains closed on the Mexican misadventure, Napoleon III found himself in a familiar position. Down but not quite out. The emperor, with his penchant for grandiose gestures and even grander miscalculations, was about to face his most dramatic and disastrous act yet, the Franco-Prussian War of 1870-1871. This was the ultimate showdown, a spectacular display of political arrogance, military missteps, and the relentless march of realpolitik that would see Napoleon III's empire crumble faster than a French pastry in a rainstorm. Now let's set the stage. The 19th century was a time of great flux in Europe, where alliances were as fickle as a cat with a new toy. France, once the belle of the European ball, was beginning to look a bit frayed around the edges, while Prussia, under the shrewd leadership of Otto von Bismarck, was on the rise. Bismarck was the kind of political mastermind who could play chess without a board, orchestrating moves and countermoves with the precision of a Swiss watch. Bismarck's vision was clear, a unified Germany under Prussian leadership. To achieve this, he needed to neutralize France, the old guard of European power. Enter Napoleon III, ever eager to assert France's dominance, and perhaps a little too quick to rise to Bismarck's bait. The spark that ignited the Franco-Prussian War was the Ems dispatch, a cleverly edited telegram that Bismarck used to provoke French outrage. Napoleon III, with his pride bruised and his judgment clouded, declared war on Prussia on July 19, 1870. And so, the stage was set for a conflict that would play out with the speed of a runaway train. Napoleon III's army, numbering around 300,000, was facing the might of a well-prepared Prussian force that would soon swell to over 500,000, thanks to their efficient mobilization system and the leadership of generals like Helmuth von Moltke. The French military, on the other hand, was like a beautiful but outdated vintage car, impressive at a glance, but lacking the modern horsepower needed to win the race. The first major clash came at the Battle of Sedan on September 1, 1870. It was a debacle of monumental proportions for the French. Napoleon III, suffering from a bout of gallstones that would make anyone cranky, was trapped with his troops in the town of Sedan, surrounded on all sides by Prussian forces. The battle was swift and decisive. Within a single day, the French army was defeated, losing over 17,000 men as casualties and seeing nearly 100,000 taken prisoner, including Napoleon III himself. Picture the emperor sitting in a carriage, dejectedly handing over his sword to the Prussians, a moment of capitulation that marked the end of his imperial dreams. With Napoleon III captured, the Second Empire collapsed like a house of cards. Back in Paris, the news of the defeat spread like wildfire, igniting a revolutionary fervor that led to the proclamation of the Third Republic on September 4, 1870. The French government, now scrambling to pick up the pieces, continued the war effort under the leadership of Léon Gambetta, who famously escaped the besieged Paris in a hot air balloon, a scene more reminiscent of a Jules Verne novel than a military campaign. Despite heroic efforts, the French were outmatched. The Prussians, with their superior tactics and organization, laid siege to Paris, a city already reeling from shortages and unrest. By January 28, 1871, after months of suffering and tens of thousands of civilian casualties, Paris surrendered, and the war was effectively over. The Treaty of Frankfurt, signed on May 10, 1871, confirmed France's humiliation, forcing the country to cede Alsace and Lorraine to Germany and pay a hefty indemnity of 5 billion francs, a staggering sum that left a deep economic scar. The Franco-Prussian War was a watershed moment, not just for France, but for Europe as a whole. It marked the end of the French Second Empire and the rise of a united German Empire, with Bismarck's vision finally realized. The balance of power in Europe shifted dramatically, setting the stage for future conflicts that would eventually lead to the First World War. Napoleon III's legacy, once a tapestry of ambition and charisma, was now irrevocably tainted by the failure of his final military gamble. In the aftermath, Napoleon III, released from captivity, went into exile in England, where he spent his final years reflecting on the empire that might have been. His dreams of restoring France to its Napoleonic glory lay in ruins, a stark reminder of the perils of imperial overreach. The Franco-Prussian War served as a cautionary tale, a historical lesson in the hubris of ambition unchecked by reality. History tends to remember Napoleon III as the man who tried to fill his uncle's formidable boots but tripped over his own feet in the process. Yet, for all his missteps, he was a figure of undeniable complexity, a leader who dared to dream big even when those dreams were built on shaky foundations. His reign, marked by both progress and folly, left an indelible mark on France and Europe, a testament to the ever-shifting tides of power and the unpredictable dance of history. And so, as the curtain falls on Napoleon III's imperial saga, we're left with the enduring lesson that ambition, while a powerful force, is no substitute for wisdom. In the grand theatre of history, it's not just the boldness of one's dreams that defines a legacy, but the ability to navigate the intricate, often unforgiving realities of the world stage. Napoleon III's story is a reminder that the dance of empire is as much about knowing when to lead as it is about knowing when to follow, and that sometimes the most important lessons are learned not in victory, but in the ashes of defeat. Amidst the dusty chaos of ancient Mesopotamia, where city-states squabbled like contestants on a reality TV show called Who Wants to Be a Dominant Power, a man named Sargon of Akkad decided he had the perfect answer to that question, himself. It was around 2334 BCE, and the region was a hotbed of political drama, complete with alliances as fragile as a soap bubble and betrayals that would make even the most seasoned Game of Thrones fan raise an eyebrow. Before Sargon sashayed onto the scene, Mesopotamia was a patchwork quilt of city-states. Places like Uruk, and Lagash were locked in a constant tussle for supremacy. This wasn't a peaceful cohabitation. It was more like a family reunion gone wrong, with each city-state trying to outdo the other in a perpetual game of one-upmanship. If you think modern politics is messy, you should have seen the diplomatic shenanigans going on back then. They were experts in the fine art of the backstab, a talent honed through years of practice. Enter Sargon, the man with a plan and a background as murky as the Euphrates. Legend has it, he was the illegitimate son of a high priestess and was set adrift in a basket on the river. Stop me if this sounds familiar. But unlike Moses, Sargon didn't just lead people to freedom. He led them into the world's first empire. His rise to power is the stuff of epic tales, but let's not get too romantic. Historical accounts suggest he started as a cupbearer to the king of Kish, a position that seems lowly until you realize it put him in the perfect spot to sip on some insider information. With his newfound knowledge and a boldness that bordered on audacity, Sargon decided it was time for a career change. Instead of waiting for a promotion, he snatched the crown for himself, possibly after a little strategic overthrowing of the king of Kish. Nobody said empire building was for the faint of heart. Once he had a crown on his head, Sargon didn't just rest on his laurels. He went on a city-state unification spree. Think of it as a hostile corporate takeover, only with more chariots and fewer spreadsheets. Sargon's military campaigns were as relentless as a summer in the desert. His strategy was simple but effective. Conquer, consolidate, and keep your enemies guessing. He took over Sumerian cities one by one, from Uruk to Umma, uniting them under his rule like a Mesopotamian magnate. By the time he was done, he had carved out an empire that stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, a distance of about 1,000 miles. To put that in perspective, that's roughly the length of Italy. No small feat when your top speed is determined by the stamina of your horses. But Sargon wasn't just a warlord. He was a master of ancient PR, a spin doctor before spin was even a thing. He proclaimed himself King of the World, a title that screams both ambition and an excellent sense of branding. Under his reign, the Akkadian language became the lingua franca, kind of like English today, but with more cuneiform. He managed to standardize weights and measures across his domain, a move that probably made merchants both cheer and curse, depending on how honest their scales were. Yet, for all his grand achievements and self-styled titles, Sargon's empire was as much a product of its circumstances as his genius. The constant bickering and infighting among the city-states had left them vulnerable to a charismatic leader with a unifying vision, or at least a bigger army. And Sargon, with his combination of military prowess and political savvy, was just the person to exploit that weakness. In the end, the Akkadian Empire wasn't just a political entity. It was a testament to the power of ambition and the right mix of opportunity and ruthlessness. The city-states, previously content to squabble amongst themselves, now found themselves part of something much larger and much less inclined to tolerate their petty disputes. But more on that later. For now, let's bask in the glory of Sargon's achievement, a tapestry woven from the threads of chaos, ambition, and a little bit of luck. After all, every empire has to start somewhere. Fast forward a generation or two, and the Akkadian Empire was living what could only be described as the Mesopotamian version of the high life. Picture trade routes crisscrossing the landscape like ancient Amazon Prime delivery lines, bustling with goods that would make any modern-day shopaholic envious. We're talking textiles, grains, metals, and exotic wares flowing faster than gossip at a royal banquet. The empire's economic engine was humming along, fueled by the spoils of conquest and the savvy management of resources. And let's not forget the cultural boom. The Akkadian Empire was hashtag-worthy before hashtags were even a thing. Sumerian scribes were busy etching their stories onto clay tablets, while Akkadian poets were composing epic tales that would outlast even the most ambitious Snapchat story. We're talking about the kind of cultural achievements that could earn you a spot on the ancient equivalent of the New York Times bestseller list. This was no accident. Sargon's descendants knew how to keep the empire rolling. Take Naram-Sin, Sargon's grandson, for example. Now here was a guy who knew that ruling an empire was about more than just sitting on a throne and wearing a fancy hat. Naram-Sin understood the value of diplomacy and the occasional display of military might, a combination that kept his neighbors on their toes and his subjects in line. To him, the empire was a delicate balance of power and persuasion, like juggling flaming torches while riding a unicycle on a tightrope. Naram-Sin also had a flair for the dramatic. In a move that would make any PR team proud, he declared himself a god. Not just any god, mind you. He dubbed himself the King of the Four Quarters, which was ancient Mesopotamian for ruler of the world. It's the kind of title that screams ambition and megalomania in equal measure. But who could blame him? When you're managing an empire with a population estimated in the hundreds of thousands, a little divine authority can go a long way in keeping the peace. This divine self-promotion wasn't just about ego, it had practical benefits. By associating himself with the gods, Naram-Sin was effectively saying, "You mess with me, you're messing with the divine order." It was the ultimate power move, one that kept rebellious thoughts at bay and ensured loyalty, or at least compliance. After all, who wants to risk the wrath of a god-king? But let's not get too caught up in the glory. Running an empire was expensive, and Naram-Sin had to keep the coffers full. The Akkadian economy was a complex web of trade, tribute, and taxation, with each city-state expected to contribute its fair share. Merchants and craftsmen were the lifeblood of this system, their goods traveling along the network of roads and rivers that connected the empire's far-flung territories. It was a logistical operation that would make a modern supply chain manager weep with envy. Naram-Sin wasn't afraid to use a little muscle when necessary, either. His military campaigns were as calculated as they were brutal. He expanded the empire's borders, securing key trade routes and quashing any rebellion with a kind of efficiency that would impress even the most ruthless corporate raider. Yet, for all his conquests, Naram-Sin knew that power wasn't just about force, it was about perception. By projecting strength, he kept potential adversaries guessing and ensured the empire's continued dominance. Yet, for all this grandeur, the Akkadian Empire was a house of cards, delicately balanced and vulnerable to a stiff breeze. Its foundations were built on a mix of military might, economic prowess, and a touch of divine smoke and mirrors. But beneath the surface, tensions simmered. The city-states, though unified, were not always content with their lot. The Akkadian rulers had to constantly negotiate the delicate dance of maintaining control while avoiding outright rebellion. And so, the golden age of the Akkadian Empire continued, a testament to human ambition and ingenuity. Yet, as with all great empires, the seeds of its eventual decline were already being sown. But that's a story for another time. For now, let's marvel at the achievements of an empire that dared to think big, even if it sometimes stumbled over its own lofty ambitions. This was a world where trade and culture flourished, where a ruler could become a god, and where the line between legend and reality was as thin as a cuneiform tablet. An empire that, for a time, seemed as eternal as the stars themselves. As the Akkadian Empire basked in its moment of glory, the truth lurking in the shadows was that the Golden Age was more like gold-plated. Sure, the empire was a magnificent tapestry, woven from the threads of ambition and dominance, but it was also riddled with moth holes that were about to become all too visible. You see, while Sargon's descendants were busy playing god-kings, Mother Nature had other plans. The climate was throwing a tantrum that would make even the most temperamental toddler look like a saint. We're talking about droughts that could dry up the Euphrates faster than you can say irrigation crisis. In a world where agriculture was the lifeblood, a prolonged drought was like the empire's main artery getting a serious cramp. Imagine telling a farmer in Akkad, "Hey, looks like the Tigris and Euphrates are running on empty," and watching the color drain from their face faster than the rivers themselves. It wasn't just about the crops, it was about survival. With less food to go around, a population that had grown fat and happy on the empire's previous bounty was suddenly hangry. And that's a combination nobody wants to deal with, especially if you're trying to maintain an empire. Let's not forget the logistical nightmare of managing this sprawling empire. Picture it, a territory stretching some 1,000 miles from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean, all without the glory of GPS. No Google Maps to save the day, just a handful of clay tablets and an unwavering sense of direction. Couriers had to memorize routes like ancient marathon runners, and any wrong turn could mean the difference between delivering vital orders and getting lost in the desert. It's hard to keep an empire running smoothly when your messages take so long to arrive that they may as well have been delivered by a carrier tortoise. Amidst this chaos, the problem of internal strife was like a time bomb with a fuse that was already lit. The city-states, those once squabbling siblings now forced into an uneasy cohabitation, were getting restless. They had been unified under Sargon's iron fist, but as the grip loosened, old rivalries began to bubble to the surface. It was like holding a family reunion where everyone pretends to get along while secretly plotting each other's downfall. The Akkadian rulers had to constantly play the ultimate game of whack-a-mole, squashing rebellions before they could gather steam. Meanwhile, external pressures were mounting. The Gutians, a pesky group of mountain-dwelling warriors, were eyeing the Akkadian Empire like a particularly juicy steak. They were the ancient equivalent of gate-crashers at a party, and they weren't above taking advantage of the Empire's distractions. While Naram-Sin and his successors were busy dealing with internal squabbles and the increasingly temperamental climate, the Gutians were sharpening their swords, biding their time for the perfect moment to pounce. And let's talk about hubris. Ah, yes, the fatal flaw that has toppled more empires than bad weather and bad luck combined. The Akkadian rulers, flush with their own grandeur, sometimes forgot that ruling an empire wasn't just about basking in the glow of your own magnificence. Naram-Sin's divine self-declaration might have been a PR coup, but it also set a dangerous precedent. When you set yourself up as a god, you'd better deliver results worthy of Olympus, or at least make sure the rain gods are on your side. The empire's economy, once a robust engine of trade and tribute, was starting to feel the pinch. The complex web of commerce that had once connected the empire was fraying as merchants struggled with the realities of less reliable routes and less plentiful goods. The tribute system, which relied on conquered cities ponying up their share, was beginning to resemble a sieve. When city-states started withholding their tribute, it wasn't just a fiscal issue. It was a political grenade waiting to go off. The cracks in the empire's foundation were widening, and the Akkadian rulers were left scrambling to patch them up before the whole structure came tumbling down. Sargon's dream was unraveling, thread by thread, and it was clear that the challenges of managing an empire were far more complex than simply conquering one. It was a lesson in the perils of overreach, and one that would be written in the annals of history with the ink of hubris and the pen of inevitability. The Akkadian Empire's story was a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the mightiest of empires can falter when the forces of nature, human ambition, and political reality collide. Yet, as the sun began to set on this once glorious empire, the seeds of its decline were sowing the soil for the rise of new powers, new stories, and new chapters in the grand saga of human history. But those tales, my friends, are for another time. For now, let's leave the Akkadians to their fate, a testament to the eternal dance of power, ambition, and the relentless march of time. As the sun set on the Akkadian Empire, the scene was less of a romantic golden glow and more akin to the last flicker of a candle in a drafty room. The empire that had once strutted across Mesopotamia like a peacock with too many plumes was now showing signs of a very mortal affliction, the slow-motion train wreck of collapse. Gone were the days when Sargon's descendants could comfortably rest on a throne made of their grandfather's laurels. Instead, they faced a reality that was more Monday morning than majestic. With the climate acting like it was on a perpetual bad hair day, rainfall became a distant memory, and the Fertile Crescent began to look more like a withered shrub. Droughts hit the empire with the subtlety of a sledgehammer, reducing agricultural output to a level that would make even a minimalist frown. These weren't the kind of bad harvests that you could shrug off with a clever rain dance. No, these were the kind that sent grain prices skyrocketing like a Mesopotamian stock market crash, leaving the populace a hangry mob of farmers, merchants, and city dwellers all wondering where their next meal was coming from. In the midst of this agricultural apocalypse, the internal politics of the Akkadian Empire began to unravel faster than a poorly knitted sweater. The rulers who followed Sargon, and even the mighty Naram-Sin, found themselves grappling with the reality that unifying an empire was a whole lot easier than keeping it together. Sargon's descendants discovered that filling his sandals was a Herculean task, better suited for those with an appetite for constant crisis management. Unfortunately, their appetite was more aligned with grand banquets than strategic foresight. As if internal strife wasn't enough to contend with, the Gutians decided to crash the Akkadian party. These mountain-dwelling warriors had been lurking on the empire's fringes like unwelcome in-laws, and they seized this moment of vulnerability with an enthusiasm usually reserved for free food. The Gutians, with their affinity for guerrilla tactics and a keen sense of timing, swept across the plains like a biblical plague, adding insult to injury by claiming the throne themselves. It was an ancient hostile takeover, and the Akkadians were left to watch their empire get commandeered by the very people they'd once dismissed as pesky neighbors. The Gutians' rise to power was less about strategic brilliance and more about capitalizing on an empire distracted by its own drama. Picture a group of opportunistic hyenas circling a wounded lion, and you've got a pretty good mental image of how they usurped control. For the Akkadian rulers, it was a bitter pill to swallow, a reminder that even the mightiest empires weren't immune to a well-timed coup. Economically, the empire's downfall was a masterclass in how not to manage an ancient economy. Once a bustling network of trade routes and tribute systems, the Akkadian economic engine started sputtering like a car running on fumes. Tribute payments from conquered territories dwindled to a trickle, as city-states saw little reason to pay homage to an empire that couldn't even keep its own house in order. Merchants, once the lifeblood of the empire's prosperity, found themselves navigating a landscape of scarcity and uncertainty. It didn't help that the Gutians, for all their martial prowess, were not exactly economic maestros. Their approach to governance was more about plunder than prosperity, and the once thriving trade routes began to wither on the vine. The economic decline was palpable, a slow bleed that left the empire gasping for breath. It was a poignant reminder that empires are as much about economic stability as they are about military might. The political landscape was no less chaotic. As the central authority weakened, regional governors, those city-state leaders who had once pledged loyalty to Akkad, began to operate with increasing autonomy. It was like watching a corporate office where middle managers suddenly decided they were CEOs, each carving out their own little fiefdom. The Akkadian rulers found themselves playing a never-ending game of catch-up, trying to rein in these rogue elements while also staving off external threats. This political fragmentation was both a cause and a consequence of the empire's decline. The more the central power waned, the bolder these regional leaders became, and the more they bickered among themselves. It was a vicious cycle, a downward spiral that no amount of royal decrees could halt. The city-states, once begrudgingly united under a common banner, now saw an opportunity to reclaim their independence, and they seized it with both hands. The Gutians' rule, for all its bravado, was more of a placeholder than a dynasty. Their hold on power was tenuous at best, a testament to the fact that taking a throne is often easier than holding onto it. The Gutians might have been adept at warfare, but when it came to the subtleties of administration and statecraft, they were as lost as a tourist without a map. Their reign was marked by a return to the fractiousness that had characterized the pre-Sargonic era, a time when city-states squabbled like children in a sandbox. Yet, for all the chaos and collapse, the Akkadian Empire's legacy was not entirely lost. Even as the Gutians clambered awkwardly onto the throne, the cultural and administrative innovations of the Akkadians left an indelible mark on the region. The Akkadian language, once the lingua franca of empire, continued to influence the cultures that followed. The idea of a unified state, albeit temporarily shattered, lingered in the collective imagination, a blueprint for future rulers who would dream of empire. In the end, the Akkadian Empire's collapse was a multifaceted affair, a tapestry woven from the threads of environmental calamity, economic mismanagement, political infighting, and opportunistic conquest. It was a lesson in the impermanence of power, a reminder that even the greatest empires are but temporary phenomena in the grand tapestry of history. As the Gutians tried to make sense of their newfound dominion, the ancient world watched and waited for the next chapter to unfold. What came next would be a tale for another time, for empires rise and fall, but history marches ever onward. As the Gutians attempted to navigate their awkward inheritance of the Akkadian Empire, the remnants of Sargon's grand vision loomed large. Despite the empire's seemingly rapid decline, its legacy was anything but fleeting. Picture the Akkadian Empire as a particularly ambitious first draft, full of scribbles, but with enough brilliant ideas to inspire future empires to pick up the pen and continue writing. The Akkadians were the first to demonstrate that you could stitch together a patchwork of city-states into a cohesive whole, even if the seams occasionally showed. Let's talk about governance, for instance. The Akkadian Empire wasn't just about conquering territories and throwing a party every time a new city-state signed on the dotted line. Sargon and his successors introduced a centralized bureaucracy that, for its time, was the height of administrative sophistication. They didn't have Excel spreadsheets, but they did have a cadre of officials who could track tribute payments, manage trade routes, and keep a watchful eye on provincial governors who might have had delusions of grandeur. It was like setting up the ancient version of a corporate headquarters, only with more clay tablets and fewer water coolers. In terms of literature and language, the Akkadians left an indelible mark. The Akkadian language, a Semitic tongue, became the diplomatic lingua franca of the region, much like English today. It was used to pen everything from legal documents to epic poetry, and its influence spread far beyond the empire's borders, seeping into the cultures that would follow. This linguistic legacy is like the ancient world's equivalent of a catchy pop song that gets stuck in your head for centuries. Even after the empire crumbled, Akkadian remained a language of administration and literature throughout Mesopotamia, proving that while political power may falter, cultural influence can linger like a stubborn perfume. Art and literature also thrived under the Akkadians. The empire became a cultural hub where artisans and scribes honed their crafts. The stele of Naram-Sin, a triumphal monument depicting the god-king's victory over the Lalubai, stands as a testament to this era's artistic ambition. It's the ancient equivalent of a blockbuster film, capturing the drama and grandeur of Akkadian achievements in stone. Meanwhile, scribes were busy immortalizing epic tales on clay tablets, stories that would lay the groundwork for later literary masterpieces like the Epic of Gilgamesh. These cultural contributions became the bedrock upon which future civilizations built their own stories, a reminder that art can outlast even the most formidable armies. But let's not romanticize Akkad's achievements without acknowledging the less glamorous realities. The empire's centralized bureaucracy, while innovative, was also a double-edged sword. It required a level of coordination and compliance that was difficult to maintain over vast distances, especially when your communication system involved a lot of waiting and hoping your messenger didn't get lost, or worse, ambushed by Gutians. The very systems that enabled the Akkadians to manage their empire also made them vulnerable to inefficiencies and corruption. Economically, the Akkadian Empire set the stage for what an interconnected world could look like. Their trade networks linked distant corners of the region, creating a flow of goods that boosted local economies and introduced people to exotic items they never knew they needed. It was like the ancient version of a global marketplace, except with more donkeys and fewer delivery drones. However, this economic integration was both a boon and a bane. While it facilitated wealth and cultural exchange, it also meant that when one part of the empire sneezed, the rest caught a cold. The droughts that crippled agriculture didn't just affect farmers. They rippled through the entire economic system, demonstrating the fragility of interconnectedness, a lesson modern economies continue to grapple with. As for the political and social factors, the Akkadians showed us that empire building is as much about negotiation and compromise as it is about conquest. Their rulers had to juggle the interests of diverse city-states, each with its own history, culture, and power dynamics. It was a delicate balancing act, like trying to keep a house of cards standing in a windstorm. The Akkadians' ability to maintain this balance, even if only temporarily, set a precedent for future empires. They demonstrated that a diverse array of peoples could be united under a single banner, a concept that would inspire later civilizations in their quest for dominion. And here's where we circle back to the cyclical nature of history. The Akkadian Empire's rise and fall offer a poignant reminder that history is less a straight line and more a series of loops and spirals. Empires rise, flourish, and inevitably falter, often because of the very strengths that once propelled them to greatness. Hubris, whether in the form of overexpansion, economic mismanagement, or divine self-aggrandizement, tends to be the Achilles heel of even the most formidable powers. The Akkadians were not the first to fall victim to their own ambition, nor would they be the last. Yet, despite their collapse, the Akkadian Empire's legacy endured. The concepts they pioneered, centralized governance, cultural patronage, and the idea of a unified state, continued to shape the world long after their political power waned. Subsequent empires, from Babylon to Persia, would take these lessons to heart, refining and expanding upon them in their own quests for dominance. The Akkadians showed that while empires may crumble, the ideas and innovations they leave behind can ripple through time, influencing generations to come. In the end, the Akkadian Empire story is one of ambition and innovation, a bold experiment in human organization that set the stage for future civilizations. It reminds us that the human struggle against entropy is eternal, a dance between order and chaos, ambition and humility. As we look back on the Akkadians, it's clear that while their empire may have faded, its echoes still resonate in the corridors of history, whispering the lessons of the past to those who dare to listen. The rise and fall of the Akkadian Empire is a tale as old as time, a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity and the inevitable march of history. In the year 1638, the world welcomed Louis XIV, a baby with a job description most adults would balk at, future King of France. This wasn't just any ordinary royal gig either. Louis had some pretty big shoes to fill. His grandfather, Henry IV, had been all about a chicken in every pot, which was a confusing metaphor since he was assassinated. Meanwhile, his father, Louis XIII, had been more into cardinal-fueled drama than chicken dinners, making Game of Thrones look like a polite tea party. Louis XIV was thrust into the spotlight at the tender age of 4, which is about the same time most kids are figuring out how to tie their shoes. Instead, Louis was learning the ropes of ruling a nation. His mother, Anne of Austria, and Cardinal Mazarin were the real powerhouses behind the tiny Tot's throne, acting as regents. Think of them as the ultimate helicopter parents, hovering over the young king to make sure he didn't accidentally declare war on England over a missing teddy bear. Now, Anne of Austria wasn't just any momager. She was a Habsburg, which in the 17th century was a bit like being born with a golden spoon and an entire silverware set in your mouth. She was savvy, political, and knew how to play the long game, ensuring her son Louis would not just be a king, but the asterisk king. Anne and Mazarin were a powerhouse duo, kind of the Beyoncé and Jay-Z of Regency, minus the music, but with plenty of courtly intrigue. Let's talk Cardinal Mazarin. Now here's a guy who knew a thing or two about wearing multiple hats, and not just the red one of a cardinal. He was a political strategist, a diplomat, and had a knack for surviving the kind of backstabbing that would make Julius Caesar shudder. Mazarin was Italian by birth, which meant he was always slightly suspect in the eyes of the French nobility, because, of course, nothing says trust issues like cross-border Catholic politics. Under Anne and Mazarin's regency, young Louis got a front-row seat to the Fronde, which sounds like a funky dance move, but was actually a series of civil wars. The Fronde was all about the nobility throwing a collective tantrum over increasing royal authority and taxation. Basically, they didn't want to pay the bill for the king's lavish tastes, which was ironic given their own penchant for ostentatious displays. These were the kind of noble revolts that were less about righteous rebellion and more about keeping their own pockets lined and their egos stroked. For Louis, the Fronde was a formative experience. Imagine being a kid and watching your own nobles try to overthrow your family. That's a trust issue waiting to happen. It wasn't just a political skirmish, it was a revelation. He learned that the nobility were about as reliable as a chocolate teapot under pressure, and this realization stuck with him. The chaos of the Fronde taught Louis that if he ever wanted a good night's sleep without worrying about being ousted, he had to put the clamps on the nobility and tighten the reins of power. This is where Louis's love for control, security, and palaces, the size of small countries, came into play. The boy king grew into a man who believed that nothing said, "I'm in charge," quite like a colossal palace with an intimidating number of rooms. And thus, his fixation on Versailles began, a place where he could keep an eye on the nobility by making them live under his gilded thumb. It was like bringing all your frenemies to live in your house, so you could watch them bicker over breakfast. But let's not get too far ahead in our story. For now, young Louis's life was a mix of learning the ropes of leadership and surviving the political quagmire left by the Fronde. The French court was a volatile cocktail of ambition, betrayal, and yes, some absurdly fabulous fashion choices. Louis was a sponge, absorbing lessons in diplomacy, power, and the importance of an impressive wardrobe. As Louis matured, he shed the regency like an outgrown cloak. By 1661, with Mazarin's death, Louis declared his intention to rule solo, stunning the court who thought regents were the adult in the room. But Louis was ready, having learned that if you want something done right, you do it yourself, or at least make sure you're the one pulling the strings. And thus, the Sun King began his glow-up. With the Fronde and its lessons firmly in the rear view, Louis was determined to shine so brightly that any shadow of rebellion would be scorched out of existence. Louis XIV's early years were a crash course in power dynamics, with enough drama to keep even the most ardent reality TV aficionado entertained. His reign would soon become one of the most iconic in French history, but it was these formative experiences that shaped the man who would become synonymous with absolute monarchy. The Sun King was just getting started, and the world was about to feel the warmth and the burn of his reign. The Sun King was just gearing up for his grand architectural venture, a project that would draw as much awe as it would criticism. Enter Versailles, the opulent palace that Louis XIV envisioned not just as a residence, but as the ultimate symbol of his absolute power. Think of it as the 17th century version of building a mansion with a moat, a drawbridge, and a "no peasants allowed" sign out front. When we talk about Versailles, we're not just talking about a few fancy rooms with chandeliers and silk drapes. We're talking about a sprawling estate that would eventually stretch over 2,000 acres, including lush gardens, fountains that defied gravity, and enough gold leaf to make King Midas blush. And here's the kicker. It cost a whopping 116 million livres. That's right, millions, in a time when most people were lucky to have a crust of bread and a roof over their heads. But why, you ask? Why spend such an astronomical sum on a palace? Well, Louis had a vision. He wanted a place that would not only reflect his glory, but also serve as a gilded cage for the nobility. By inviting them to live at Versailles, Louis could keep a watchful eye on the very people who might be tempted to plot against him. It was like hosting the world's longest house party, where the host is secretly watching every move, making sure nobody steals the silverware or the throne. Now, let's talk logistics. Building Versailles wasn't as simple as laying a few bricks and calling it a day. It required the labor of thousands of workers, artisans, and craftsmen who toiled day and night to bring Louis's vision to life. The construction was plagued by challenges, not least of which was the swampy terrain. Imagine trying to build a palace on a marsh. Think less palatial estate and more sinking ship. Despite these obstacles, the work continued, fueled by Louis's determination and, let's be honest, his ego. The Sun King wanted to make sure that his palace was the envy of Europe, a place that would leave foreign dignitaries slack-jawed and the French nobility dutifully impressed. And it worked. Versailles became the center of political power in France, a place where decisions were made and alliances forged over lavish dinners and extravagant balls. But let's not get too starry-eyed. Behind the grandeur and the glittering facade, Versailles was an economic black hole. The cost of maintaining such a massive estate was astronomical. The palace required a constant influx of money to keep the lights on, or rather, the candles lit, the water flowing through the fountains, and the nobility entertained. It was said that Louis spent half of France's annual revenue on Versailles alone, a staggering figure that makes you wonder if he ever glanced at a budget. Of course, not everything about Versailles was quite as regal as it appeared. For one, the plumbing left much to be desired. Despite its grandeur, the palace was notorious for its lack of toilets. Yes, you heard that right. In a palace that could accommodate thousands of guests, finding a bathroom was like embarking on a treasure hunt with no map. The nobility had to make do with chamber pots, which were emptied out of windows, often to the dismay of unsuspecting passers-by below. It was a far cry from the luxury one might expect from such an opulent residence. But let's not forget the political genius behind all this excess. Louis's decision to bring the nobility to Versailles was a masterstroke of control. By keeping them close, he could monitor their allegiances, curb their power, and ensure that any whisper of rebellion was quashed before it could take root. The noble class, dazzled by the splendor of Versailles, was kept busy with courtly rituals and the never-ending quest for royal favor. It was a brilliant tactic, albeit an expensive one. And yet, despite the astronomical costs and logistical headaches, Versailles became the symbol of Louis's reign, a testament to his power and ambition. It was a stage where the Sun King could shine brightest, a place where he could gather the threads of his kingdom and weave them into a tapestry of absolute monarchy. Louis XIV's legacy, much like the palace itself, was built on a foundation of grandeur, ambition, and a hefty dose of debt. So there you have it, the tale of Versailles, a palace that was as much a reflection of Louis's dreams as it was a reminder of the price of power. It was a place where the sun never set, and where the king's vision of absolute rule was as unyielding as the gilded walls that surrounded him. But as we leave this chapter, remember, the Sun King's reign was far from a fairy tale. It was a complex narrative of ambition, control, and the relentless pursuit of glory. And while Versailles stood as a monument to Louis's legacy, it also foreshadowed the challenges that lay ahead for the king and his country. Stay tuned, because the story of Louis XIV is far from over. And so we continue our saga of the Sun King, where Louis XIV wasn't just a monarch, but a maestro conducting the symphony of absolute power. His reign wasn't about merely ruling France, it was about becoming France itself. And to the infamous declaration, "État, c'est moi, I am the state." It's the kind of bold pronouncement that would make even the most confident corporate CEOs blush. This wasn't just an expression of ego. It was a political philosophy that cemented Louis's approach to governance. With this phrase, Louis wasn't just staking his claim to supreme authority. He was redefining the very nature of leadership, wrapping it tightly around his golden throne. Now, let's dig into how Louis XIV orchestrated this grand takeover. Centralization was the name of the game, and Louis played it like a seasoned chess master. The nobility, once powerful feudal lords with the autonomy of mini-monarchs, found their independence systematically dismantled. Louis saw to it that governance flowed through him like the Seine through Paris. He crafted a government where ministers weren't just advisors, but extensions of his will. He packed his councils with men who owed their positions to him, ensuring that loyalty was a currency more valuable than gold. The Sun King's political maneuvers weren't just about consolidating power. They were about reshaping the landscape of French governance entirely. Take the intendants, for instance, royal officials dispatched to enforce Louis's will in the provinces, ensuring that local governance danced to the rhythm of Versailles. These intendants were the eyes and ears of the king, keeping tabs on the nobility and ensuring that regional power remained firmly under royal thumbs. By appointing these officials, Louis sidestepped traditional noble influence, effectively placing a royal watchdog in every corner of his realm. But enough about political chess. Let's talk about one of the more controversial pieces on Louis's board, the revocation of the Edict of Nantes. Originally issued by his grandfather, Henry IV, this edict had granted religious freedoms to Protestants, also known as Huguenots, within a predominantly Catholic France. It was a rare beacon of tolerance in a time when religious wars were as fashionable as powdered wigs. But for Louis, religious unity was synonymous with political stability, and he saw Protestantism as a pesky thorn in his vision of a Catholic France. In 1685, Louis revoked the Edict of Nantes, underestimating the economic and social tremors this decision would unleash. Imagine pulling a Jenga block from the bottom of a tower. Sure, it might hold at first, but the whole structure is far from stable. By revoking the edict, Louis effectively made Protestantism illegal, forcing many Huguenots to convert, flee, or face persecution. It was a move that would echo far beyond the borders of France, shaking the very foundations of the international stage. The economic implications were immediate and severe. The Huguenots, known for their work ethic and skill, were a significant part of the French economy, contributing as artisans, craftsmen, and merchants. By driving this industrious group from France, Louis inadvertently stoked the fires of economic decline. It's estimated that around 200,000 Huguenots fled France, taking their talents and innovations to more tolerant nations like England, the Netherlands, and Prussia. These exiled Huguenots didn't just find new homes, they helped fuel the economies of their new countries, inadvertently strengthening France's rivals. Talk about shooting yourself in the regal foot. Now let's peel back the layers of Louis's complex relationship with Protestantism. On one hand, he was a devout Catholic, committed to the idea of a unified Catholic France. On the other, his policies sparked division and dissent, not to mention a fair bit of international ire. Louis's revocation of the Edict of Nantes didn't just impact France internally. It fueled the fires of international tension, leading to conflicts that were as much about religion as they were about political power. The age of absolutism, contrary to its serene-sounding name, was anything but a peaceful nap by the fire. Louis's aggressive religious policies were like tossing a match into a powder keg, and Europe was more than ready to ignite. The War of the League of Augsburg, also known as the 9 Years' War, saw Louis pitted against a coalition of European powers that feared his growing influence. It was a costly affair, both in terms of human lives and financial resources, draining the coffers that Louis had so grandly filled with taxes squeezed from his subjects. Speaking of taxes, let's not forget how Louis's need for revenue to fund his grandiose projects and military campaigns led to economic policies that were, at best, controversial. To maintain his lavish court and fund endless wars, Louis relied heavily on taxation. The burden fell disproportionately on the common folk, the peasants who worked the land, and the burgeoning middle class who filled the towns. The nobility, meanwhile, enjoyed a relatively cushy tax exemption, a perk of their proximity to the Sun King. It was a fiscal policy that sowed seeds of discontent, setting the stage for future unrest. Louis XIV's reign was a masterclass in the art of balancing power and politics, but it was also a cautionary tale of the perils of absolute rule. His maneuvers reshaped France and left an indelible mark on European history, but they were not without their costs. As we pause in our exploration of Louis's reign, remember that the Sun King story is not just one of triumph and splendor. It is also a tale of ambition, consequence, and the relentless pursuit of control, a narrative that continues to unfold in the annals of history. Stay with us as we delve deeper into the complexities of Louis XIV's reign, where the light of his legacy is as illuminating as it is blinding. As the Sun King's reign continued to unfold, Louis XIV wasn't just interested in dictating policies. He was also keen on dictating style, culture, and social order. Picture a world where the court of Versailles wasn't just a political powerhouse, but the epicenter of fashion and etiquette. This was Louis's vision, a place where the mere act of bowing could transform into an Olympic sport, with its own set of rules and a gold medal for the most graceful genuflection. Now, if you think your company's dress code is a bit much, you haven't seen anything until you've glimpsed the intricate sartorial expectations at Versailles. Louis's court was a kaleidoscope of color, silk, lace, and wigs that could double as flotation devices. The king himself was a trendsetter, favoring high heels and elaborate outfits that screamed, "Notice me," long before Instagram influencers made it a career. And it wasn't just about looking good. Your outfit was a status symbol, a declaration of your closeness to the king. Consider it the 17th century equivalent of a verified Twitter account, minus the blue checkmark and the trolls. But fashion was just one thread in the elaborate tapestry of court life. Louis was a maestro of social engineering, turning the aristocracy into performers in his grand theatre. He instituted a complex system of etiquette that dictated everything from how to enter a room to the precise angle of your bow. It was like living in a Jane Austen novel, only with a lot more powdered wigs and a king watching your every move. And watch he did. By keeping his nobles busy with courtly rituals and ceremonies, Louis effectively neutered any potential opposition. They were too busy worrying about the latest fashion faux pas to plot rebellion. This was social control at its finest, where the chaos of politics was transformed into the choreography of court life. Louis's reign was a constant reminder. If you control the narrative, you control the power. Now, let's turn the spotlight on Louis's personal life. Never a dull moment there. The Sun King was a man of many passions, and one of his most enduring interests was his affection for the ladies of the court. Louis's list of mistresses reads like the credits of a soap opera, each with their own subplot and intrigues. There was Louise de la Vallière, his first official mistress, who bore him several children, and then was unceremoniously replaced by Françoise Athénaïs, Marquise de Montespan. Ah, the drama. But Montespan was not just any mistress. She was the queen bee of Louis's court, wielding influence and power that made even the most seasoned politicians sweat. Her reign as Louis's favorite was marked by scandal and opulence, with rumors of her involvement in the infamous affair of the poisons, a scandal that involved black magic and murder plots swirling like a 17th century tabloid headline. Of course, Louis's romantic escapades weren't just about passion. They were strategic as well. By involving himself with various noblewomen, he could ensure their families' loyalty, a scandalous yet effective political strategy. It was a dance as intricate as any court ball, where alliances were forged in whispered conversations and clandestine meetings. Yet, amid this whirlwind of romance, intrigue, and politics, Louis was also a patron of the arts, a king with a taste for the theatrical. Enter Molière and Lully, two names that would forever be associated with the cultural renaissance of Louis's court. Molière, the playwright with a penchant for satire, was a favorite of the king. His plays a mirror reflecting the foibles of French society. If you've ever chuckled at a cleverly written comedy, you have Molière to thank. His works, like Tartuffe and The Misanthrope, were bold critiques wrapped in humor, often poking fun at the very people seated in the audience. Talk about gutsy. Then there was Jean-Baptiste Lully, the composer who revolutionized French music with his operas and ballets. Under Lully's baton, music became not just a background accompaniment, but a central feature of court life. His compositions were grand, much like the palace itself, and his influence on the French music scene was as enduring as Louis's reign. Lully's collaboration with Molière gave birth to the Comédie Ballet, a harmonious blend of theatre, music, and dance that was the 17th century equivalent of a blockbuster musical. But despite this cultural flourish, life at Versailles wasn't all glitter and gold. The palace, with its opulence and grandeur, masked an underlying tension, The nobility, though dazzled by the splendor, often found themselves trapped in a gilded cage. Life at court was a relentless pursuit of favor, a game of political chess where one wrong move could see you exiled to your country estate faster than you could say royal displeasure. Louis's court was a microcosm of his reign, a place where power, politics, and personal relationships intertwined in a complex dance. It was a testament to his ability to control not just the political landscape of France, but the very fabric of its society. Under his watchful eye, the nobility became actors in his grand production, where every action was scrutinized, every relationship exploited for political gain. Yet, for all the control and manipulation, Louis's court was also a beacon of cultural brilliance. It was a place where art thrived, where the bounds of creativity were pushed, and where the legacy of the Sun King would shine brightly long after his reign ended. As we continue to explore the complexities of Louis XIV's reign, remember that his story is not just one of power and politics. It's a tale of culture, influence, and a king who understood the art of ruling as both a science and an art form. Stay tuned, because the curtain is far from falling on the saga of the Sun King. As the curtain begins to fall on the saga of Louis XIV, let's delve into the twilight years of his reign, a period as colorful as his youth, yet shadowed by the burdens of his own making. Louis, now a seasoned monarch, found himself caught in the grand finale of his long and ostentatious rule. The War of the Spanish Succession, kicking off in 1701, was the last act of his military theatre, and it was a showstopper, though not in the way he might have hoped. This war was sparked by a seemingly simple question: who would inherit the Spanish throne after the childless Charles II of Spain shuffled off this mortal coil? Spoiler alert, it wasn't going to be simple. The European powers gathered like sharks around a buffet, each eyeing the Spanish Empire's juicy morsels. Louis, never one to shy away from a good territorial squabble, decided his grandson Philip should sit on the Spanish throne. Naturally, this ruffled quite a few European feathers, leading to a coalition against France that included England, the Dutch Republic, and the Holy Roman Empire. It was like the Avengers, but with more wigs and fewer superheroes. Now, Louis wasn't just playing a game of thrones. He was playing with France's finances, which were already as fragile as a house of cards in a windstorm. The war dragged on for 13 years, bleeding France dry, financially and figuratively. It wasn't just the cost of cannons and cavalry. It was the toll it took on the French populace, already groaning under the weight of heavy taxes. By the time the Treaty of Utrecht was signed in 1713, Louis's France was left with a mountain of debt, estimated at around 2 billion livres. To put that in perspective, that's about the price tag of maintaining Versailles for a century, or perhaps a really fancy yacht party today. Yet, amidst the chaos of war and financial ruin, Louis's legacy wasn't entirely a tale of woe. His cultural and architectural contributions were undeniable. Versailles, love it or loathe it, stood as a symbol of French grandeur, a glittering testament to human ambition and folly. The palace wasn't just a home. It was an embodiment of Louis's philosophy that art and architecture could project power and control. The gardens alone, with their meticulously manicured hedges and gravity-defying fountains, were enough to make any visitor's jaw drop and wallet cringe. But let's not get too swept away by the romance of it all. The Sun King's reign, for all its gilded glory, left France with more than just pretty palaces. The economic and social burdens were as real as the chandeliers in the Hall of Mirrors. Louis's insistence on absolute control, while dazzling in its execution, also sowed the seeds of discontent. The heavy taxation that funded his wars and whims ultimately fell on the common folk, leaving the peasants to pay the price for royal excess. You could say Louis left France with a parting gift, a legacy of financial strain that would echo down the corridors of history long after his reign ended. Now, was Louis XIV a visionary or a tyrant? The answer, like most things in history, isn't black and white, more like a Monet painting, full of vibrant colors and blurred lines. On one hand, he was the architect of modern statecraft, wielding power with a flair unmatched by any of his contemporaries. He turned France into the cultural beacon of Europe, a place where art and opulence danced hand in hand. On the other hand, his relentless pursuit of glory and grandeur often overshadowed the practical realities of governance, leaving a nation grappling with the weight of his ambitions. As Louis lay on his deathbed in 1715, perhaps he reflected on the sprawling empire he had built, the wars he had waged, and the palace that bore witness to his reign. His final words reportedly urged his successor, his great-grandson Louis XV, to avoid war and to rule with wisdom and moderation. It's a bit like handing over the keys to a sports car and saying, "Try not to drive too fast," after you've already burned out the clutch. In the end, Louis XIV's legacy is a mosaic of contradictions. A king who reigned with unmatched splendor, yet left his country teetering on the edge of economic collapse. His vision reshaped France, but it also set the stage for future upheavals, as the seeds of revolution lay dormant beneath the surface of his absolute monarchy. The Sun King, in all his radiant complexity, remains a figure both revered and reviled, a testament to the enduring power of ambition, for better or worse. So as we close the book on Louis XIV, remember that history is never a simple tale of heroes and villains. It's a kaleidoscope of human endeavor, fraught with triumphs and tragedies, brilliance and blunders. Louis's story reminds us that the past isn't just a series of events, but a mirror reflecting the timeless dance of power, ambition, and the pursuit of legacy. As you drift off to sleep, ponder this. In the grand tapestry of history, every thread matters, and every story, no matter how grand or humble, leaves its mark on the fabric of time.